Chapter 41. The Siege of La Rochelle. The Siege of La Rochelle was one of the great political events of the reign of Louis XIII, and one of the great military enterprises of the cardinal. It is, then, interesting and even necessary that we should say a few words about it, particularly as many details of this siege are connected in too important a manner with the story we have undertaken to relate to allow us to pass it over in silence. The political plans of the cardinal when he undertook this siege were extensive. Let us unfold them first, and then pass on to the private plans which perhaps had not less influence upon his eminence than the others. Of the important cities given up by Henry IV to the Huguenots as places of safety, there only remained La Rochelle. It became necessary, therefore, to destroy this last bulwark of Calvinism, a dangerous leaven with which the ferments of civil revolt and foreign war were constantly mingling. Spaniards, Englishmen, and Italian malcontents, adventurers of all nations and soldiers of fortune of every sect, flocked at the first summons under the standard of the Protestants, and organized themselves like a vast association, whose branches diverged freely over all parts of Europe. La Rochelle, which had derived a new importance from the ruin of the other Calvinist cities, was then the focus of dissensions and ambition. Moreover, its port was the last in the kingdom of France open to the English, and by closing it against England, our eternal enemy, the cardinal completed the work of Joan of Arc and the Duc de Guise. Thus Bassompierre, who was at once Protestant and Catholic, Protestant by conviction and Catholic as commander of the Order of the Holy Ghost, Bassompierre, who was a German by birth and a Frenchman at heart, in short, Bassompierre, who had a distinguished command at the siege of La Rochelle, said, in charging at the head of several other Protestant nobles like himself, "You will see, gentlemen, that we shall be fools enough to take La Rochelle." And Bassompierre was right. The cannonade of the Isle of Rye presaged to him the dragonnades of the Cevennes. The taking of La Rochelle was the preface to the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. We have hinted that by the side of these views of the leveling and simplifying minister, which belong to history, the chronicler is forced to recognize the lesser motives of the amorous man and jealous rival. Richelieu, as everyone knows, had loved the queen. Was this love a simple political affair, or was it naturally one of those profound passions which Anne of Austria inspired in those who approached her? That we are not able to say, but at all events we have seen by the anterior developments of this story, that Buckingham had the advantage over him, and in 2 or 3 circumstances, particularly that of the diamond studs, had, thanks to the devotedness of the Three Musketeers and the courage and conduct of D'Artagnan, cruelly mystified him. It was, then, Richelieu's object not only to get rid of an enemy of France, but to avenge himself on a rival. But this vengeance must be grand and striking and worthy in every way of a man who held in his hand, as his weapon for combat, the forces of a kingdom. Richelieu knew that in combating England he combated Buckingham, that in triumphing over England he triumphed over Buckingham. In short, that in humiliating England in the eyes of Europe he humiliated Buckingham in the eyes of the Queen. On his side Buckingham, in pretending to maintain the honor of England, was moved by interests exactly like those of the cardinal. Buckingham also was pursuing a private vengeance. Buckingham could not under any pretense be admitted into France as an ambassador. He wished to enter it as a conqueror. It resulted from this that the real stake in this game, which 2 most powerful kingdoms played for the good pleasure of 2 amorous men, was simply a kind look from Anne of Austria. The first advantage had been gained by Buckingham. Arriving unexpectedly in sight of the Isle of Rye with 90 vessels and nearly 20,000 men, he had surprised the Comte de Toiras, who commanded for the king in the isle, and he had, after a bloody conflict, effected his landing. Allow us to observe in passing that in this fight perished the Baron de Chantal, that the Baron de Chantal left a little orphan girl 18 months old, and that this little girl was afterward Madame de Sévigné. The Comte de Toiras retired into the citadel Saint Martin with his garrison, and threw 100 men into a little fort called the Fort of La Prée. This event had hastened the resolutions of the cardinal, until the king and he could take the command of the siege of La Rochelle, which was determined. He had sent Monsieur to direct the first operations, and had ordered all the troops he could dispose of to march toward the theater of war. It was of this detachment, sent as a vanguard, that our friend D'Artagnan formed a part. The king, as we have said, was to follow as soon as his bed of justice had been held, but on rising from his bed of justice on the 28th of June, he felt himself attacked by fever. He was, notwithstanding, anxious to set out, but his illness becoming more serious, he was forced to stop at Villeroy. Now, whenever the king halted, the musketeers halted. It followed that D'Artagnan, who was as yet purely and simply in the Guards, found himself, for the time at least, separated from his good friends, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. This separation, which was no more than an unpleasant circumstance, would have certainly become a cause of serious uneasiness if he had been able to guess by what unknown dangers he was surrounded. He, however, arrived without accident in the camp established before La Rochelle, on the 10th of the month of September of the year 1627. Everything was in the same state. The Duke of Buckingham and his English, masters of the Isle of Rye, continued to besiege, but without success, the citadel St. Martin and the fort of La Prée, and hostilities with La Rochelle had commenced 2 or 3 days before, about a fort which the Duc d'Angoulême had caused to be constructed near the city. The guards, under the command of M. de Cessert, took up their quarters at the Minims, but, as we know, D'Artagnan, possessed with ambition to enter the Musketeers, had formed but few friendships among his comrades, and he felt himself isolated and given up to his own reflections. His reflections were not very cheerful. From the time of his arrival in Paris, he had been mixed up with public affairs, but his own private affairs had made no great progress, either in love or fortune. As to love, the only woman he could have loved was Madame Bonacieux, and Madame Bonacieux had disappeared, without his being able to discover what had become of her. As to fortune, he had made, he, humble as he was, an enemy of the cardinal, that is to say, of a man before whom trembled the greatest men of the kingdom, beginning with the king. That man had the power to crush him, and yet he had not done so. For a mind so perspicuous as that of D'Artagnan, this indulgence was a light by which he caught a glimpse of a better future. Then he had made himself another enemy, less to be feared, he thought, but nevertheless he instinctively felt not to be despised. This enemy was Milady. In exchange for all this, he had acquired the protection and goodwill of the Queen, but the favor of the Queen was at the present time an additional cause of persecution, and her protection, as it was known, protected badly, as witnessed Chillet and Madame Bonacieux. What he had clearly gained in all this was the diamond, worth 5,000 or 6,000 livres, which he wore on his finger, and even this diamond, supposing that D'Artagnan in his projects of ambition, wished to keep it, to make it some day a pledge for the gratitude of the Queen, had not in the meanwhile, since he could not part with it, more value than the gravel he trod under his feet. We say the gravel he trod under his feet, for D'Artagnan made these reflections while walking solitarily along a pretty little road which led from the camp to the village of Angoulême. Now, these reflections had led him further than he intended, and the day was beginning to decline when, by the last ray of the setting sun, he thought he saw the barrel of a musket glitter from behind a hedge. D'Artagnan had a quick eye and a prompt understanding. He comprehended that the musket had not come there of itself, and that he who bore it had not concealed himself behind a hedge with any friendly intentions. He determined therefore to direct his course as clear from it as he could when, on the opposite side of the road from behind a rock, he perceived the extremity of another musket. This was evidently an ambuscade. The young man cast a glance at the first musket and saw, with a certain degree of inquietude, that it was leveled in his direction, but as soon as he perceived that the orifice of the barrel was motionless, he threw himself upon the ground. At the same instant the gun was fired, and he heard the whistling of a ball pass over his head. No time was to be lost. D'Artagnan sprang up with a bound, and at the same instant the ball from the other musket tore up the gravel on the very spot on the road where he had thrown himself with his face to the ground. D'Artagnan was not one of those foolhardy men who seek a ridiculous death in order that it may be said of them that they did not retreat a single step. Besides, courage was out of the question here. D'Artagnan had fallen into an ambush. "If there is a third shot," said he to himself, "I am a lost man." He immediately therefore took to his heels and ran toward the camp, with the swiftness of the young men of his country, so renowned for their agility. But whatever might be his speed, the first who fired, having had time to reload, fired a second shot, and this time so well aimed that it struck his hat, and carried it 10 paces from him. As he, however, had no other hat, he picked up this as he ran, and arrived at his quarters very pale and quite out of breath. He sat down without saying a word to anybody and began to reflect. This event might have 3 causes. The first and the most natural was that it might be an ambuscade of the Rochellais, who might not be sorry to kill one of His Majesty's guards, because it would be an enemy the less, and this enemy might have a well-furnished purse in his pocket. D'Artagnan took his hat, examined the hole made by the ball and shook his head. The ball was not a musket ball, it was an arquebus ball. The accuracy of the aim had first given him the idea that a special weapon had been employed. This could not, then, be a military ambuscade, as the ball was not of the regular caliber. This might be a kind remembrance of Monsieur the Cardinal. It may be observed that at the very moment when, thanks to the ray of the sun, he perceived the gun barrel, he was thinking with astonishment on the forbearance of his Eminence with respect to him. But D'Artagnan again shook his head. For people toward whom he had but to put forth his hand, His Eminence had rarely recourse to such means. It might be a vengeance of Milady, that was most probable. He tried in vain to remember the faces or dress of the assassins. He had escaped so rapidly that he had not had leisure to notice anything. "Ah, my poor friends," murmured D'Artagnan, "where are you? And that you should fail me." D'Artagnan passed a very bad night. 3 or 4 times he started up, imagining that a man was approaching his bed for the purpose of stabbing him. Nevertheless, day dawned without darkness having brought any accident. But D'Artagnan well suspected that that which was deferred was not relinquished. D'Artagnan remained all day in his quarters, assigning as a reason to himself that the weather was bad. At 9 o'clock the next morning, the drums beat to arms. The Duc d'Orleans visited the posts. The guards were under arms, and D'Artagnan took his place in the midst of his comrades. Monsieur passed along the front of the line. Then all the superior officers approached him to pay their compliments, M. de Cessert, captain of the guards as well as the others. At the expiration of a minute or two, it appeared to D'Artagnan that M. de Cessert made him a sign to approach. He waited for a fresh gesture on the part of his superior, for fear he might be mistaken, but this gesture being repeated, he left the ranks and advanced to receive orders. "Monsieur is about to ask for some men of good will for a dangerous mission, but one which will do honor to those who shall accomplish it, and I made you a sign in order that you might hold yourself in readiness." "Thanks, my captain," replied D'Artagnan, who wished for nothing better than an opportunity to distinguish himself under the eye of the lieutenant general. In fact, the Rochellais had made a sortie during the night, and had retaken a bastion of which the royal army had gained possession 2 days before. The matter was to ascertain, by reconnoitering, how the enemy guarded this bastion. At the end of a few minutes Monsieur raised his voice and said, "I want for this mission 3 or 4 volunteers, led by a man who can be depended upon." "As to the man to be depended upon, I have him under my hand, monsieur," said M. de Cessert, pointing to D'Artagnan, "and as to the 4 or 5 volunteers, monsieur has but to make his intentions known, and the men will not be wanting." "4 men of good will who will risk being killed with me," said D'Artagnan, raising his sword. 2 of his comrades of the guards immediately sprang forward, and 2 other soldiers having joined them, the number was deemed sufficient. D'Artagnan declined all others, being unwilling to take the first chance from those who had the priority. It was not known whether, after the taking of the bastion, the Rochellais had evacuated it or left a garrison in it. The object then was to examine the place near enough to verify the reports. D'Artagnan set out with his 4 companions and followed the trench. The 2 guards marched abreast with him, and the 2 soldiers followed behind. They arrived thus, screened by the lining of the trench, till they came within 100 paces of the bastion. There, on turning round, D'Artagnan perceived that the 2 soldiers had disappeared. He thought that, beginning to be afraid, they had stayed behind, and he continued to advance. At the turning of the Counters Carpe they found themselves within about 60 paces of the bastion. They saw no one, and the bastion seemed abandoned. The 3 composing our forlorn hope were deliberating whether they should proceed any further, when all at once a circle of smoke enveloped the giant of stone, and a dozen balls came whistling around D'Artagnan and his companions. They knew all they wished to know: the bastion was guarded. A longer stay in this dangerous spot would have been useless imprudence. D'Artagnan and his 2 companions turned their backs, and commenced a retreat which resembled a flight. On arriving at the angle of the trench which was to serve them as a rampart, one of the guardsmen fell. A ball had passed through his breast. The other, who was safe and sound, continued his way toward the camp. D'Artagnan was not willing to abandon his companion thus, and stooped to raise him and assist him in regaining the lines, but at this moment 2 shots were fired. One ball struck the head of the already wounded guard, and the other flattened itself against a rock, after having passed within 2 inches of D'Artagnan. The young man turned quickly round, for this attack could not have come from the bastion, which was hidden by the angle of the trench. The idea of the 2 soldiers who had abandoned him occurred to his mind, and with them he remembered the assassins of 2 evenings before. He resolved this time to know with whom he had to deal, and fell upon the body of his comrade as if he were dead. He quickly saw 2 heads appear above an abandoned work within 30 paces of him. They were the heads of the 2 soldiers. D'Artagnan had not been deceived. These 2 men had only followed for the purpose of assassinating him, hoping that the young man's death would be placed to the account of the enemy. As he might be only wounded and might denounce their crime, they came up to him with the purpose of making sure. Fortunately, deceived by D'Artagnan's trick, they neglected to reload their guns. When they were within 10 paces of him, D'Artagnan, who in falling had taken care not to let go his sword, sprang up close to them. The assassins comprehended that if they fled toward the camp without having killed their man, they should be accused by him. Therefore their first idea was to join the enemy. One of them took his gun by the barrel and used it as he would a club. He aimed a terrible blow at D'Artagnan, who avoided it by springing to one side, but by this movement he left a passage free to the bandit, who darted off toward the bastion. As the Rochellais who guarded the bastion were ignorant of the intentions of the man they saw coming toward them, they fired upon him, and he fell, struck by a ball which broke his shoulder. Meantime D'Artagnan had thrown himself upon the other soldier, attacking him with his sword. The conflict was not long. The wretch had nothing to defend himself with but his discharged arquebus. The sword of the guardsman slipped along the barrel of the now useless weapon, and passed through the thigh of the assassin, who fell. D'Artagnan immediately placed the point of his sword at his throat. "Oh, do not kill me," cried the bandit. "Pardon, my officer, and I will tell you all." "Is your secret of enough importance to me to spare your life for it?" asked the young man, withholding his arm. "Yes, if you think existence worth anything to a man of 20 as you are, and who may hope for everything, being handsome and brave as you are." "Wretch," cried D'Artagnan, "speak quickly. Who employed you to assassinate me?" "A woman whom I don't know, but who is called Milady." "But if you don't know this woman, how do you know her name?" "My comrade knows her and called her so. It was with him she agreed and not with me. He even has in his pocket a letter from that person, who attaches great importance to you, as I have heard him say." "But how did you become concerned in this villainous affair?" "He proposed to me to undertake it with him, and I agreed." "And how much did she give you for this fine enterprise?" 100 louis. "Well, come," said the young man, laughing, "she thinks I am worth something." 100 louis? Well, that was a temptation for two wretches like you. I understand why you accepted it, and I grant you my pardon, but upon one condition." "What is that?" said the soldier, uneasy at perceiving that all was not over. "That you will go and fetch me the letter your comrade has in his pocket." "But," cried the bandit, "that is only another way of killing me. How can I go and fetch that letter under the fire of the bastion?" "You must nevertheless make up your mind to go and get it, or I swear you shall die by my hand." "Pardon, monsieur, pity? In the name of that young lady you love, and whom you perhaps believe dead but who is not," cried the bandit, throwing himself upon his knees and leaning upon his hand, for he began to lose his strength with his blood. "And how do you know there is a young woman whom I love, and that I believe that woman dead?" asked D'Artagnan. "By that letter which my comrade has in his pocket." "You see, then," said D'Artagnan, "that I must have that letter. So no more delay, no more hesitation, or else whatever may be my repugnance to soiling my sword a second time with the blood of a wretch like you, I swear by my faith as an honest man." And at these words D'Artagnan made so fierce a gesture that the wounded man sprang up. "Stop, stop!" cried he, regaining strength by force of terror. I will go, I will go." D'Artagnan took the soldier's arquebus, made him go on before him, and urged him toward his companion by pricking him behind with his sword. It was a frightful thing to see this wretch, leaving a long track of blood on the ground he passed over, pale with approaching death, trying to drag himself along without being seen to the body of his accomplice, which lay 20 paces from him. Terror was so strongly painted on his face, covered with a cold sweat, that D'Artagnan took pity on him, and casting upon him a look of contempt, "Stop," said he, "I will show you the difference between a man of courage and such a coward as you. Stay where you are, I will go myself." And with a light step, an eye on the watch, observing the movements of the enemy and taking advantage of the accidents of the ground, D'Artagnan succeeded in reaching the second soldier. There were two means of gaining his object: to search him on the spot, or to carry him away, making a buckler of his body and search him in the trench. D'Artagnan preferred the second means, and lifted the assassin onto his shoulders at the moment the enemy fired. A slight shock, the dull noise of 3 balls which penetrated the flesh, a last cry, a convulsion of agony, proved to D'Artagnan that the would-be assassin had saved his life. D'Artagnan regained the trench, and threw the corpse beside the wounded man, who was as pale as death. Then he began to search. A leather pocketbook, a purse in which was evidently a part of the sum which the bandit had received, with a dice box and dice, completed the possessions of the dead man. He left the box and dice where they fell, threw the purse to the wounded man, and eagerly opened the pocketbook. Among some unimportant papers he found the following letter, that which he had sought at the risk of his life. "Since you have lost sight of that woman and she is now in safety in the convent, which you should never have allowed her to reach, try at least not to miss the man. If you do, You know that my hand stretches far, and that you shall pay very dearly for the 100 louis you have from me. No signature. Nevertheless, it was plain the letter came from Milady. He consequently kept it as a piece of evidence, and being in safety behind the angle of the trench, he began to interrogate the wounded man. He confessed that he had undertaken with his comrade, the same who was killed, to carry off a young woman who was to leave Paris by the Barrière de la Villette, but having stopped to drink at a cabaret, they had missed the carriage by 10 minutes. "But what were you to do with that woman?" asked D'Artagnan with anguish. "We were to have conveyed her to a hotel in the Place Royale," said the wounded man. "Yes, yes," murmured D'Artagnan, "that's the place, Milady's own residence." Then the young man tremblingly comprehended what a terrible thirst for vengeance urged this woman on to destroy him, as well as all who loved him, and how well she must be acquainted with the affairs of the court, since she had discovered all. There could be no doubt she owed this information to the cardinal. But amid all this he perceived, with a feeling of real joy, that the queen must have discovered the prison in which poor Madame Bonacieux was explaining her devotion, and that she had freed her from that prison, and the letter he had received from the young woman, and her passage along the road of Chaillot like an apparition, were now explained. Then also, as Athos had predicted, it became possible to find Madame Bonacieux, and a convent was not impregnable. This idea completely restored clemency to his heart. He turned toward the wounded man, who had watched with intense anxiety all the various expressions of his countenance, and holding out his arm to him, said, "Come, I will not abandon you thus. Lean upon me and let us return to the camp." "Yes," said the man, who could scarcely believe in such magnanimity, "but is it not to have me hanged?" "You have my word," said he, "for the second time I give you your life." The wounded man sank upon his knees, to again kiss the feet of his preserver, but D'Artagnan, who had no longer a motive for staying so near the enemy, abridged the testimonials of his gratitude. The guardsman who had returned at the first discharge announced the death of his 4 companions. They were therefore much astonished and delighted in the regiment when they saw the young man come back safe and sound. D'Artagnan explained the sword wound of his companion by a sortie which he improvised. He described the death of the other soldier and the perils they had encountered. This recital was for him the occasion of veritable triumph. The whole army talked of this expedition for a day, and Monsieur paid him his compliments upon it. Besides this, as every great action bears its recompense with it, the brave exploit of D'Artagnan resulted in the restoration of the tranquillity he had lost. In fact, D'Artagnan believed that he might be tranquil, as one of his 2 enemies was killed and the other devoted to his interests. This tranquillity proved one thing, that D'Artagnan did not yet know Milady. Chapter 42. The Anjou Wine. After the most disheartening news of the king's health, a report of his convalescence began to prevail in the camp, and as he was very anxious to be in person at the siege, it was said that as soon as he could mount a horse he would set forward. Meantime, Monsieur, who knew that from one day to the other he might expect to be removed from his command by the Duc d'Angoulême, by Bassompierre, or by Schomberg, who were all eager for his post, did but little, lost his days in wavering, and did not dare to attempt any great enterprise to drive the English from the Isle of Rye, where they still besieged the citadel Saint Martin and the fort of La Prée, as on their side the French were besieging La Rochelle. D'Artagnan, as we have said, had become more tranquil, as always happens after a past danger, particularly when the danger seems to have vanished. He only felt one uneasiness, and that was at not hearing any tidings from his friends. But one morning at the commencement of the month of November everything was explained to him by this letter, dated from Villeroy. D'Artagnan, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, after having had an entertainment at my house and enjoying themselves very much, created such a disturbance that the provost of the castle, a rigid man, has ordered them to be confined for some days. But I accomplished the order they have given me by forwarding to you a dozen bottles of my Anjou wine, with which they are much pleased. They are desirous that you should drink to their health in their favorite wine. I have done this and am, Monsieur, with great respect, your very humble and obedient servant, Godot, purveyor of the Musketeers. That's all well, cried D'Artagnan. They think of me in their pleasures as I thought of them in my troubles. Well, I will certainly drink to their health with all my heart, but I will not drink alone. And D'Artagnan went among those guardsmen with whom he had formed greater intimacy than with the others, to invite them to enjoy with him this present of delicious Anjou wine which had been sent him from Villeroy. One of the 2 guardsmen was engaged that evening, and another the next, so the meeting was fixed for the day after that. D'Artagnan, on his return, sent the 12 bottles of wine to the refreshment room of the guards, with strict orders that great care should be taken of it, And then, on the day appointed, as the dinner was fixed for midday, D'Artagnan sent Planchet at 9 in the morning to assist in preparing everything for the entertainment. Planchet, very proud of being raised to the dignity of landlord, thought he would make all ready, like an intelligent man, and with this view called in the assistance of the lackey of one of his master's guests, named Fourreau, and the false soldier who had tried to kill D'Artagnan and who, belonging to no corps, had entered into the service of D'Artagnan, or rather of Planchet, after D'Artagnan had saved his life. The hour of the banquet being come, the 2 guards arrived, took their places, and the dishes were arranged on the table. Planchet waited, towel on arm. Fourreau uncorked the bottles, and Brisemont, which was the name of the convalescent, poured the wine, which was a little shaken by its journey, carefully into decanters. Of this wine, the first bottle being a little thick at the bottom, Brisemont poured the lees into a glass, and D'Artagnan desired him to drink it, for the poor devil had not yet recovered his strength. The guests, having eaten the soup, were about to lift the first glass of wine to their lips, when all at once the cannon sounded from Fort Louis and Fort Neuf. The guardsmen, imagining this to be caused by some unexpected attack, either of the besieged or the English, sprang to their swords. D'Artagnan, not less forward than they, did likewise, and all ran out in order to repair to their posts. But scarcely were they out of the room before they were made aware of the cause of this noise. Cries of "Live the King! Live the Cardinal!" resounded on every side, and the drums were beaten in all directions. In short, the king, impatient as has been said, had come by forced marches, and had that moment arrived with all his household and a reinforcement of 10,000 troops. His musketeers preceded and followed him. D'Artagnan, placed in line with his company, saluted with an expressive gesture his 3 friends, whose eyes soon discovered him, and M. de Treville, who detected him at once. The ceremony of reception over, the 4 friends were soon in one another's arms. "Pardieu!" cried D'Artagnan, "you could not have arrived in better time. The dinner cannot have had time to get cold. Can it, gentlemen?" added the young man, turning to the 2 guards, whom he introduced to his friends. "Ah, said Porthos, "it appears we are feasting." "I hope," said Aramis, "there are no women at your dinner." "Is there any drinkable wine in your tavern?" asked Athos. "Well, pardieu, there is yours, my dear friend," replied D'Artagnan. "Our wine?" said Athos, astonished. "Yes, that you sent me." "We sent you wine?" "You know very well, the wine from the hills of Anjou." "Yes, I know what brand you are talking about." "The wine you prefer. Well, in the absence of champagne and Chambertin, you must content yourselves with that." "And so, connoisseurs in wine as we are, we have sent you some Anjou wine?" said Porthos. "Not exactly, it is the wine that was sent by your order." "On our account?" said the 3 Musketeers. "Did you send this wine, Aramis?" said Athos. "No. And you, Porthos?" "No. And you, Athos?" "No." "If it was not you, it was your purveyor," said D'Artagnan. "Our purveyor?" "Yes, your purveyor, God, the purveyor of the Musketeers." "My faith." "Never mind where it comes from," said Porthos. "Let us taste it, and if it is good, let us drink it." "No," said Athos, "don't let us drink wine which comes from an unknown source." "You are right, Athos," said D'Artagnan. "Did none of you charge your purveyor, God, to send me some wine?" "No." "And yet you say he has sent you some as from us?" "Here is his letter," said D'Artagnan, and he presented the note to his comrades. "This is not his writing," said Athos. "I am acquainted with it. Before we left Villeroy I settled the accounts of the regiment." "A false letter altogether," said Porthos. "We have not been disciplined." "D'Artagnan," said Aramis in a reproachful tone, "how could you believe that we had made a disturbance?" D'Artagnan grew pale, and a convulsive trembling shook all his limbs. "Thou alarmest me," said Athos, who never used thee and thou but upon very particular occasions. "What has happened?" "Look you, my friends," cried D'Artagnan, "a horrible suspicion crosses my mind. Can this be another vengeance of that woman?" It was now Athos who turned pale. D'Artagnan rushed toward the refreshment room, the 3 Musketeers and the 2 guards following him. The first object that met the eyes of D'Artagnan on entering the room was Brisemont, stretched upon the ground and rolling in horrible convulsions. Planchet and Fourreau, as pale as death, were trying to give him succor, but it was plain that all assistance was useless. All the features of the dying man were distorted with agony. "Ah!" cried he on perceiving D'Artagnan. "Ah! This is frightful. You pretend to pardon me, and you poison me." "I!" cried D'Artagnan. "I, wretch? What do you say?" "I say that it was you who gave me the wine. I say that it was you who desired me to drink it. I say you wish to avenge yourself on me, and I say that it is horrible." "Do not think so, Brisemont," said D'Artagnan. "Do not think so. I swear to you I protest." "Oh, but God is above. God will punish you." "My God, grant that he may one day suffer what I suffer." "Upon the gospel," said D'Artagnan, throwing himself down by the dying man, "I swear to you that the wine was poisoned and that I was going to drink of it as you did." "I do not believe you," cried the soldier, and he expired amid horrible tortures. "Frightful! Frightful!" murmured Athos, while Porthos broke the bottles and Aramis gave orders, a little too late, that a confessor should be sent for. "Oh, my friends," said D'Artagnan, "you come once more to save my life, not only mine but that of these gentlemen. Gentlemen," continued he, addressing the guardsmen, "I request you will be silent with regard to this adventure. Great personages may have had a hand in what you have seen, and if talked about, the evil would only recoil upon us." "Ah, monsieur," stammered Planchet, more dead than alive, "ah, monsieur, what an escape I have had." "How, sirrah? You were going to drink my wine?" "To the health of the king, monsieur. I was going to drink a small glass of it if Fourreau had not told me I was called." "Alas," said Fourreau, whose teeth chattered with terror, "I wanted to get him out of the way that I might drink myself." "Gentlemen," said D'Artagnan, addressing the guardsmen, "you may easily comprehend that such a feast can only be very dull after what has taken place, so accept my excuses and put off the party till another day, I beg of you." The two guardsmen courteously accepted D'Artagnan's excuses, and perceiving that the four friends desired to be alone, retired. When the young guardsman and the three musketeers were without witnesses, they looked at one another with an air which plainly expressed that each of them perceived the gravity of their situation. "In the first place," said Athos, "let us leave this chamber. The dead are not agreeable company, particularly when they have died a violent death." "Planchet," said D'Artagnan, "I commit the corpse of this poor devil to your care. Let him be interred in holy ground. He committed a crime, it is true, but he repented of it." And the four friends quit the room, leaving to Planchet and Fourreau the duty of paying mortuary honors to Brisemont. The host gave them another chamber and served them with fresh eggs and some water, which Athos went himself to draw at the fountain. In a few words, Porthos and Aramis were posted as to the situation. "Well," said D'Artagnan to Athos, "you see, my dear friend, that this is war to the death." Athos shook his head. "Yes, yes," replied he, "I perceive that plainly, but do you really believe it is she?" "I am sure of it. Nevertheless, I confess I still doubt." "But the fleur-de-lis on her shoulder?" "She is some Englishwoman who has committed a crime in France, and has been branded in consequence." "Athos, she is your wife, I tell you," repeated D'Artagnan. "Only reflect how much the two descriptions resemble each other." "Yes, but I should think the other must be dead, I hanged her so effectually." It was D'Artagnan who now shook his head in his turn. "But in either case what is to be done?" said the young man. "The fact is, one cannot remain thus, with a sword hanging eternally over his head," said Athos. "We must extricate ourselves from this position." "But how?" "Listen. You must try to see her and have an explanation with her. Say to her, peace or war. My word as a gentleman never to say anything of you, never to do anything against you. On your side, a solemn oath to remain neutral with respect to me. If not, I will apply to the chancellor, I will apply to the king, I will apply to the hangman, I will move the courts against you, I will denounce you as branded, I will bring you to trial, and if you are acquitted, well, by the faith of a gentleman, I will kill you at the corner of some wall as I would a mad dog." "I like the means well enough," said D'Artagnan, "but where and how to meet with her?" "Time, dear friend, time brings round opportunity. Opportunity is the martingale of man. The more we have ventured the more we gain when we know how to wait." "Yes, but to wait surrounded by assassins and poisoners." "Bah," said Athos. "God has preserved us hitherto, God will preserve us still." "Yes, Besides, we are men, and everything considered, it is our lot to risk our lives. But she?" asked he in an undertone. "What she?" asked Athos. "Constance. Madame Bonacieux." "Ah, that's true," said Athos. "My poor friend, I had forgotten you were in love." "Well, but," said Aramis, "have you not learned by the letter you found on the wretched corpse that she is in a convent? One may be very comfortable in a convent, and as soon as the siege of La Rochelle is terminated, I promise you on my part." "Good," cried Athos, "good? Yes, my dear Aramis, we all know that your views have a religious tendency." "I am only temporarily a musketeer," said Aramis humbly. "It is some time since we heard from his mistress," said Athos in a low voice. "But take no notice, We know all about that. Well, said Porthos, it appears to me that the means are very simple. What? Asked D'Artagnan. You say she is in a convent? Replied Porthos. Yes. Very well. As soon as the siege is over, we'll carry her off from that convent. But we must first learn what convent she is in. That's true, said Porthos. But I think I have it, said Athos. Don't you say, dear D'Artagnan, that it is the queen who has made choice of the convent for her? I believe so at least. In that case Porthos will assist us. And how so, if you please? Why, by your marchioness, your duchess, your princess. She must have a long arm. Hush, said Porthos, placing a finger on his lips. I believe her to be a cardinalist, she must know nothing of the matter. Then, said Aramis, I take upon myself to obtain intelligence of her. You, Aramis? Cried the three friends. You. And how? By the queen's almoner, to whom I am very intimately allied, said Aramis, coloring. And on this assurance, the four friends who had finished their modest repast separated, with the promise of meeting again that evening. D'Artagnan returned to less important affairs, and the Three Musketeers repaired to the king's quarters, where they had to prepare their lodging. Chapter 43. The Sign of the Red Dovecot. Meanwhile the king, who, with more reason than the cardinal, showed his hatred for Buckingham, although scarcely arrived, was in such a haste to meet the enemy that he commanded every disposition to be made to drive the English from the Isle of Rye, and afterward to press the siege of La Rochelle. But notwithstanding his earnest wish, he was delayed by the dissensions which broke out between Bassompierre and Schomberg, against the Duc d'Angoulême. Bassompierre and Schomberg were marshals of France, and claimed their right of commanding the army under the orders of the king. But the cardinal, who feared that Bassompierre, a Huguenot at heart, might press but feebly the English and Rochellese, his brothers in religion, supported the Duc d'Angoulême, whom the king, at his instigation, had named lieutenant general. The result was that to prevent Bassompierre and Schomberg from deserting the army, a separate command had to be given to each. Bassompierre took up his quarters on the north of the city between Leu and Dampierre, the Duc d'Angoulême on the east from Dampierre to Périgny, and de Schomberg on the south from Périgny to Angoulême. The quarters of Monsieur were at Dampierre. The quarters of the king were sometimes at Estrie, sometimes at Géry. The cardinal's quarters were upon the downs at the bridge of La Pierre, in a simple house without any entrenchment. So that Monsieur watched Bassompierre, the king, the Duc d'Angoulême, and the Cardinal de Schomberg. As soon as this organization was established, they set about driving the English from the isle. The juncture was favorable. The English, who require, above everything, good living in order to be good soldiers, only eating salt meat and bad biscuit, had many invalids in their camp. Still further, the sea, very rough at this period of the year all along the sea coast, destroyed every day some little vessel, and the shore, from the point of L'Aiguillon to the trenches, was at every tide literally covered with the wrecks of pinnacles, roberges, and feluccas. The result was that even if the king's troops remained quietly in their camp, it was evident that some day or other Buckingham, who only continued in the isle from obstinacy, would be obliged to raise the siege. But as de Toiras gave information that everything was preparing in the enemy's camp for a fresh assault, the king judged that it would be best to put an end to the affair, and gave the necessary orders for a decisive action. As it is not our intention to give a journal of the siege, but on the contrary only to describe such of the events of it as are connected with the story we are relating, we will content ourselves with saying in 2 words that the expedition succeeded, to the great astonishment of the king and the great glory of the cardinal. The English, repulsed foot by foot, beaten in all encounters and defeated in the passage of the Isle of Loire, were obliged to re-embark, leaving on the field of battle 2,000 men, among whom were 5 colonels, 3 lieutenant colonels, 250 captains, 20 gentlemen of rank, 4 pieces of cannon, and 60 flags, which were taken to Paris by Claude de Saint-Simon, and suspended with great pomp in the arches of Notre Dame. Te Deums were chanted in camp, and afterward throughout France. The cardinal was left free to carry on the siege without having, at least at the present, anything to fear on the part of the English. But it must be acknowledged this response was but momentary. An envoy of the Duke of Buckingham, named Montague, was taken, and proof was obtained of a league between the German Empire, Spain, England, and Lorraine. This league was directed against France. Still further, in Buckingham's lodging, which he had been forced to abandon more precipitately than he expected, papers were found which confirmed this alliance and which, as the cardinal asserts in his memoirs, strongly compromised Madame de Chevreuse and consequently the queen. It was upon the cardinal that all the responsibility fell, for one is not a despotic minister without responsibility. All, therefore, of the vast resources of his genius were at work night and day, engaged in listening to the least report heard in any of the great kingdoms of Europe. The cardinal was acquainted with the activity, and more particularly the hatred, of Buckingham. If the league which threatened France triumphed, all his influence would be lost. Spanish policy and Austrian policy would have their representatives in the cabinet of the Louvre, where they had as yet but partisans, and he, Richelieu, the French minister, the national minister, would be ruined. The king, even while obeying him like a child, hated him as a child hates his master, and would abandon him to the personal vengeance of Monsieur and the Queen. He would then be lost, and France perhaps with him. All this must be prepared against. Courtiers, becoming every instant more numerous, succeeded one another day and night, in the little house of the Bridge of La Pierre, in which the cardinal had established his residence. There were monks who wore the frock with such an ill grace that it was easy to perceive they belonged to the church militant. Women a little inconvenienced by their costume as pages and whose large trousers could not entirely conceal their rounded forms, and peasants with blackened hands but with fine limbs, savoring of the man of quality a league off. There were also less agreeable visits, for 2 or 3 times reports were spread that the cardinal had nearly been assassinated. It is true that the enemies of the cardinal said that it was he himself who set these bungling assassins to work, in order to have, if wanted, the right of using reprisals. But we must not believe everything ministers say, nor everything their enemies say. These attempts did not prevent the cardinal, to whom his most inveterate detractors have never denied personal bravery, from making nocturnal excursions, sometimes to communicate to the Duc d'Angoulême important orders, sometimes to confer with the king, and sometimes to have an interview with a messenger whom he did not wish to see at home. On their part the Musketeers, who had not much to do with the siege, were not under very strict orders and led a joyous life. This was the more easy for our 3 companions in particular, for being friends of M. de Treville, they obtained from him special permission to be absent after the closing of the camp. Now, one evening when D'Artagnan, who was in the trenches, was not able to accompany them, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, mounted on their battle steeds, enveloped in their war cloaks, with their hands upon their pistol butts, were returning from a drinking place called the Red Dovecot, which Athos had discovered 2 days before upon the route to Jerry, following the road which led to the camp and quite on their guard, as we have stated, for fear of an ambuscade. When about a quarter of a league from the village of Boisneau, they fancied they heard the sound of horses approaching them. They immediately all 3 halted, closed in and waited, occupying the middle of the road. In an instant, and as the moon broke from behind a cloud, they saw at a turning of the road 2 horsemen who, on perceiving them, stopped in their turn, appearing to deliberate whether they should continue their route or go back. The hesitation created some suspicion in the 3 friends, and Athos, advancing a few paces in front of the others, cried in a firm voice, "Who goes there?" "Who goes there, yourselves?" replied one of the horsemen. "That is not an answer," replied Athos. "Who goes there? Answer, or we charge." "Beware of what you are about, gentlemen," said a clear voice which seemed accustomed to command. "It is some superior officer making his night rounds," said Athos. "What do you wish, gentlemen?" "Who are you?" said the same voice in the same commanding tone. "Answer in your turn, or you may repent of your disobedience." "King's Musketeers," said Athos, more and more convinced that he who interrogated them had the right to do so. "What company?" "Company of Treville." "Advance, and give an account of what you are doing here at this hour." The 3 companions advanced rather humbly, for all were now convinced that they had to do with someone more powerful than themselves, leaving Athos the post of speaker. One of the 2 riders, he who had spoken second, was 10 paces in front of his companion. Athos made a sign to Porthos and Aramis also to remain in the rear, and advanced alone. "Your pardon, my officer," said Athos, "but we were ignorant with whom we had to do, and you may see that we were keeping good guard." "Your name?" said the officer, who covered a part of his face with his cloak. "But yourself, monsieur," said Athos, who began to be annoyed by this inquisition. "Give me, I beg you, the proof that you have the right to question me." "Your name?" repeated the cavalier a second time, letting his cloak fall and leaving his face uncovered. "Monsieur the Cardinal," cried the stupefied Musketeer. "Your name?" cried his Eminence for the 3rd time. "Athos," said the Musketeer. The Cardinal made a sign to his attendant, who drew near. "These 3 Musketeers shall follow us," said he, in an undertone. "I am not willing it should be known I have left the camp, and if they follow us we shall be certain they will tell nobody." "We are gentlemen, monseigneur," said Athos. "Require our parole, and give yourself no uneasiness." Thank God we can keep a secret. The cardinal fixed his piercing eyes on this courageous speaker. You have a quick ear, Monsieur Athos, said the cardinal, but now listen to this. It is not from mistrust that I request you to follow me, but for my security. Your companions are no doubt Messrs. Porthos and Aramis. Yes, your eminence, said Athos, while the 2 musketeers who had remained behind advanced hat in hand. I know you, gentlemen, said the cardinal. I know you. I know you are not quite my friends, and I am sorry you are not so, but I know you are brave and loyal gentlemen, and that confidence may be placed in you. Monsieur Athos, do me then the honor to accompany me, you and your 2 friends, and then I shall have an escort to excite envy in his majesty, if we should meet him. The 3 musketeers bowed to the necks of their horses. Well, upon my honor, said Athos, your eminence is right in taking us with you. We have seen several ill-looking faces on the road, and we have even had a quarrel at the Red Dovecot with 4 of those faces. A quarrel, and what for, gentlemen? Said the cardinal. You know I don't like quarrelers. And that is the reason why I have the honor to inform your eminence of what has happened, for you might learn it from others, and upon a false account believe us to be in fault. What have been the results of your quarrel? Said the cardinal, knitting his brow. My friend Aramis here has received a slight sword wound in the arm, but not enough to prevent him, as your eminence may see, from mounting to the assault tomorrow, if your eminence orders an escalade. But you are not the men to allow sword wounds to be inflicted upon you thus, said the cardinal. Come, be frank, gentlemen, you have settled accounts with somebody. Confess, you know I have the right of giving absolution. I, monseigneur, said Athos. I did not even draw my sword, but I took him who offended me round the body, and threw him out of the window. It appears that in falling, continued Athos with some hesitation, he broke his thigh. Ah, aye, said the cardinal, and you, Monsieur Porthos? I, monseigneur, knowing that dueling is prohibited, I seized a bench, and gave one of those brigands such a blow that I believe his shoulder is broken. Very well, said the cardinal, and you, Monsieur Aramis? Monseigneur, being of a very mild disposition, and being likewise, of which Monseigneur perhaps is not aware, about to enter into orders, I endeavored to appease my comrades, when one of these wretches gave me a wound with a sword treacherously across my left arm. Then I admit my patience failed me. I drew my sword in my turn, and as he came back to the charge, I fancied I felt that in throwing himself upon me, he let it pass through his body. I only know for a certainty that he fell, and it seemed to me that he was borne away with his 2 companions. The devil, gentlemen, said the cardinal, 3 men placed hors de combat in a cabaret squabble. You don't do your work by halves. And pray what was this quarrel about? These fellows were drunk, said Athos, and knowing there was a lady who had arrived at the cabaret this evening, they wanted to force her door. Force her door, said the cardinal, and for what purpose? To do her violence, without doubt, said Athos. I have had the honor of informing your eminence that these men were drunk. And was this lady young and handsome? Asked the cardinal, with a certain degree of anxiety. We did not see her, monseigneur, said Athos. You did not see her? Ah, very well, replied the cardinal quickly. You did well to defend the honor of a woman, and as I am going to the Red Dovecot myself, I shall know if you have told me the truth. Monseigneur, said Athos haughtily, we are gentlemen, and to save our heads we would not be guilty of a falsehood. Therefore I do not doubt what you say, Monsieur Athos, I do not doubt it for a single instant. But, added he, to change the conversation, was this lady alone? The lady had a cavalier shut up with her, said Athos, but as notwithstanding the noise, this cavalier did not show himself, it is to be presumed that he is a coward. Judge not rashly, says the Gospel, replied the cardinal. Athos bowed. And now, gentlemen, that's well, continued the cardinal. I know what I wish to know, follow me. The 3 musketeers passed behind his eminence, who again enveloped his face in his cloak, and put his horse in motion, keeping from 8 to 10 paces in advance of his 4 companions. They soon arrived at the silent, solitary inn. No doubt the host knew what illustrious visitor was expected, and had consequently sent intruders out of the way. 10 paces from the door the cardinal made a sign to his esquire and the 3 musketeers to halt. A saddled horse was fastened to the window shutter. The cardinal knocked 3 times and in a peculiar manner. A man enveloped in a cloak came out immediately, and exchanged some rapid words with the cardinal, after which he mounted his horse and set off in the direction of Surgères, which was likewise the way to Paris. Advance, gentlemen, said the cardinal. You have told me the truth, my gentlemen, said he, addressing the musketeers. and it will not be my fault if our encounter this evening be not advantageous to you. In the meantime, follow me." The cardinal alighted. The three musketeers did likewise. The cardinal threw the bridle of his horse to his esquire. The three musketeers fastened the horses to the shutters. The host stood at the door. For him, the cardinal was only an officer coming to visit a lady. "Have you any chamber on the ground floor where these gentlemen can wait near a good fire?" said the cardinal. The host opened the door of a large room, in which an old stove had just been replaced by a large and excellent chimney. "I have this," said he. "That will do," replied the cardinal. "Enter, gentlemen, and be kind enough to wait for me. I shall not be more than half an hour." And while the three musketeers entered the ground floor room, the cardinal, without asking further information, ascended the staircase like a man who has no need of having his road pointed out to him. Chapter 44. The Utility of Stovepipes. It was evident that without suspecting it, and actuated solely by their chivalrous and adventurous character, our three friends had just rendered a service to someone the cardinal honored with his special protection. Now who was that someone? That was the question the three musketeers put to one another. Then, seeing that none of their replies could throw any light on the subject, Porthos called the host and asked for dice. Porthos and Aramis placed themselves at the table and began to play. Athos walked about in a contemplative mood. While thinking and walking, Athos passed and repassed before the pipe of the stove, broken in halves, the other extremity passing into the chamber above, and every time he passed and repassed he heard a murmur of words, which at length fixed his attention. Athos went close to it, and distinguished some words that appeared to merit so great an interest that he made a sign to his friends to be silent, remaining himself bent with his ear directed to the opening of the lower orifice. "Listen, milady," said the cardinal, "the affair is important. Sit down and let us talk it over." "Milady," murmured Athos. "I listen to your eminence with greatest attention," replied a female voice which made the musketeers start. "A small vessel with an English crew, whose captain is on my side, awaits you at the mouth of Charente at Fort La Pointe Star. He will set sail tomorrow morning. Fort La Pointe, or Fort Vassou, was not built until 1672, nearly 50 years later. I must go thither tonight? Instantly. That is to say, when you have received my instructions. 2 men whom you will find at the door on going out will serve you as escort. You will allow me to leave first. Then after half an hour, you can go away in your turn." "Yes, monseigneur." "Now let us return to the mission with which you wish to charge me, and as I desire to continue to merit the confidence of your eminence, deign to unfold it to me in terms clear and precise, that I may not commit an error." There was an instant of profound silence between the two interlocutors. It was evident that the cardinal was weighing beforehand the terms in which he was about to speak, and that Milady was collecting all her intellectual faculties to comprehend the things he was about to say, and to engrave them in her memory when they should be spoken. Athos took advantage of this moment to tell his 2 companions to fasten the door inside, and to make them a sign to come and listen with him. The 2 musketeers, who loved their ease, brought a chair for each of themselves and one for Athos. All 3 then sat down with their heads together and their ears on the alert. "You will go to London," continued the cardinal. "Arrived in London you will seek Buckingham. I must beg your eminence to observe," said Milady, "that since the affair of the diamond studs, about which the duke always suspected me, his grace distrusts me." "Well, this time," said the cardinal, "it is not necessary to steal his confidence, but to present yourself frankly and loyally as a negotiator." "Frankly and loyally," repeated Milady, with an unspeakable expression of duplicity. "Yes, frankly and loyally," replied the cardinal in the same tone. "All this negotiation must be carried on openly. I will follow your eminence's instructions to the letter. I only wait till you give them. You will go to Buckingham in my behalf, and you will tell him I am acquainted with all the preparations he has made, but that they give me no uneasiness, since at the first step he takes I will ruin the queen. Will he believe that your eminence is in a position to accomplish the threat thus made? Yes, for I have the proofs. I must be able to present these proofs for his appreciation. Without doubt. And you will tell him I will publish the report of Boisrobert and the Marquis de Beautru, upon the interview which the Duke had at the residence of Madame the Constable with the Queen on the evening Madame the Constable gave a masquerade. You will tell him, in order that he may not doubt, that he came there in the costume of the Great Mogul, which the Chevalier de Guise was to have worn, and that he purchased this exchange for the sum of 3,000 pistoles. Well, monseigneur? All the details of his coming into and going out of the palace, on the night when he introduced himself in the character of an Italian fortune-teller, you will tell him, that he may not doubt the correctness of my information, that he had under his cloak a large white robe dotted with black tears, death's heads and crossbones, for in case of a surprise, he was to pass for the phantom of the White Lady who, as all the world knows, appears at the Louvre every time any great event is impending. Is that all, Monseigneur? Tell him also that I am acquainted with all the details of the adventure at Amiens, that I will have a little romance made of it, wittily turned, with a plan of the garden and portraits of the principal actors in that nocturnal romance. I will tell him that. Tell him further that I hold Montague in my power, that Montague is in the Bastille, that no letters were found upon him, it is true, but that torture may make him tell much of what he knows, and even what he does not know. Exactly. Then add that his Grace has, in the precipitation with which he quit the Isle of Rye, forgotten and left behind him in his lodging a certain letter from Madame de Chevreuse which singularly compromises the Queen, inasmuch as it proves not only that Her Majesty can love the enemies of the King but that she can conspire with the enemies of France. You recollect perfectly all I have told you, do you not? Your Eminence will judge. The ball of Madame the Constable, the night at the Louvre, the evening at Amiens, the arrest of Montague, the letter of Madame de Chevreuse. That's it, said the Cardinal, that's it. You have an excellent memory, milady. But, resumed she to whom the Cardinal addressed this flattering compliment, if, in spite of all these reasons, the Duke does not give way and continues to menace France? The Duke is in love to madness or rather to folly, replied Richelieu with great bitterness. Like the ancient paladins, he has only undertaken this war to obtain a look from his lady love. If he becomes certain that this war will cost the honor, and perhaps the liberty, of the lady of his thoughts, as he says, I will answer for it he will look twice. And yet, said Milady, with a persistence that proved she wished to see clearly to the end of the mission with which she was about to be charged, if he persists? If he persists, said the Cardinal. That is not probable. It is possible, said Milady. If he persists, His Eminence made a pause and resumed, if he persists, well, then I shall hope for one of those events which change the destinies of states. If your Eminence would quote to me some one of these events in history, said Milady, perhaps I should partake of your confidence as to the future. Well, here for example, said Richelieu, when, in 1610 for a cause similar to that which moves the Duke, King Henry IV, of glorious memory was about at the same time to invade Flanders and Italy, in order to attack Austria on both sides. Well, did there not happen an event which saved Austria? Why should not the King of France have the same chance as the Emperor? Your Eminence means, I presume, the knife stab in the Rue de la Ferronnerie? Precisely, said the Cardinal. Does not your Eminence fear that the punishment inflicted upon Ravaillac may deter anyone who might entertain the idea of imitating him? There will be, in all times and in all countries, particularly if religious divisions exist in those countries, fanatics who ask nothing better than to become martyrs. And observe, it just occurs to me that the Puritans are furious against Buckingham, and their preachers designate him as the Antichrist. Well, said Milady. Well, continued the Cardinal in an indifferent tone, the only thing to be sought for at this moment is some woman, handsome, young, and clever, who has cause of quarrel with the Duke. The Duke has had many affairs of gallantry, and if he has fostered his amours by promises of eternal constancy, he must likewise have sown the seeds of hatred by his eternal infidelities. No doubt, said Milady coolly, such a woman may be found. Well, such a woman who would place the knife of Jacques Clement or of Ravaillac in the hands of a fanatic, would save France. Yes, but she would then be the accomplice of an assassination. Were the accomplices of Ravaillac or of Jacques Clement ever known? No, for perhaps they were too high-placed for anyone to dare look for them where they were. The Palace of Justice would not be burned down for everybody, Monseigneur. You think then that the fire at the Palace of Justice was not caused by chance? Asked Richelieu, in the tone with which he would have put a question of no importance. I, Monseigneur, replied Milady. I think nothing, I quote a fact, that is all. Only I say that if I were named Madame de Montpensier, or the Queen Marie de Médicis, I should use less precautions than I take, being simply called Milady Cleric. That is just, said Richelieu. What do you require then? I require an order which would ratify beforehand all that I should think proper to do for the greatest good of France. But in the first place, this woman I have described must be found who is desirous of avenging herself upon the Duke. She is found, said Milady. Then the miserable fanatic must be found who will serve as an instrument of God's justice. He will be found. Well, said the Cardinal, then it will be time to claim the order which you just now required. Your Eminence is right, replied Milady, and I have been wrong in seeing in the mission with which you honor me anything but that which it really is, that is, to announce to his grace, on the part of your eminence, that you are acquainted with the different disguises by means of which he succeeded in approaching the Queen during the fête given by Madame the Constable, that you have proofs of the interview granted at the Louvre by the Queen to a certain Italian astrologer who was no other than the Duke of Buckingham, that you have ordered a little romance of a satirical nature to be written upon the adventures of Amiens, with a plan of the gardens in which those adventures took place, and portraits of the actors who figured in them, that Montague is in the Bastille, and that the torture may make him say things he remembers, and even things he has forgotten, that you possess a certain letter from Madame de Chevreuse, found in his Grace's lodging, which singularly compromises not only her who wrote it, but her in whose name it was written. Then, if he persists, notwithstanding all this, as that is, as I have said, the limit of my mission, I shall have nothing to do but to pray God to work a miracle for the salvation of France. That is it not, Monseigneur, and I shall have nothing else to do? That is it, replied the cardinal dryly. And now, said Milady, without appearing to remark the change of the Duke's tone toward her, now that I have received the instructions of your eminence as concerns your enemies, Monseigneur will permit me to say a few words to him of mine? Have you enemies then? Asked Richelieu. Yes, Monseigneur, enemies against whom you owe me all your support, for I made them by serving your eminence. Who are they? Replied the Duke. In the first place there is a little intrigante named Bonacieux. She is in the prison of Nantes. That is to say, she was there, replied Milady, but the Queen has obtained an order from the King by means of which she has been conveyed to a convent. To a convent? Said the Duke. Yes, to a convent. And to which? I don't know, the secret has been well kept. But I will know. And your eminence will tell me in what convent that woman is? I can see nothing inconvenient in that, said the cardinal. Well, now I have an enemy much more to be dreaded by me than this little Madame Bonacieux. Who is that? Her lover. What is his name? Oh, your eminence knows him well, cried Milady, carried away by her anger. He is the evil genius of both of us. It is he who in an encounter with your eminence's guards decided the victory in favor of the King's Musketeers. It is he who gave 3 desperate wounds to De Wardes, your emissary, and who caused the affair of the diamond studs to fail. It is he who, knowing it was I who had Madame Bonacieux carried off, has sworn my death. Ah, aye, said the cardinal, I know of whom you speak. I mean that miserable D'Artagnan. He is a bold fellow, said the cardinal. And it is exactly because he is a bold fellow that he is the more to be feared. I must have, said the Duke, a proof of his connection with Buckingham. A proof? Cried Milady, I will have 10. Well then, it becomes the simplest thing in the world. Get me that proof and I will send him to the Bastille. So far good, Monseigneur, but afterwards? When once in the Bastille there is no afterward, said the cardinal in a low voice. Ah, pardieu, continued he, if it were as easy for me to get rid of my enemy as it is easy to get rid of yours, and if it were against such people you require impunity. Monseigneur, replied Milady, a fair exchange. Life for life, man for man, give me one, I will give you the other. I don't know what you mean, nor do I even desire to know what you mean, replied the cardinal, but I wish to please you and see nothing out of the way in giving you what you demand with respect to so infamous a creature, the more so as you tell me this D'Artagnan is a libertine, a duellist and a traitor. An infamous scoundrel, Monseigneur, a scoundrel. Give me paper, a quill and some ink then, said the cardinal. Here they are, Monseigneur. There was a moment of silence, which proved that the cardinal was employed in seeking the terms in which he should write the note, or else in writing it. Athos, who had not lost a word of the conversation, took his 2 companions by the hand, and led them to the other end of the room. Well, said Porthos, what do you want, and why do you not let us listen to the end of the conversation? Hush, said Athos, speaking in a low voice. We have heard all it was necessary we should hear. Besides, I don't prevent you from listening, but I must be gone. You must be gone, said Porthos, and if the cardinal asks for you, what answer can we make? You will not wait till he asks. You will speak first, and tell him that I am gone on the lookout, because certain expressions of our host have given me reason to think the road is not safe. I will say 2 words about it to the cardinal's esquire likewise. The rest concerns myself. Don't be uneasy about that. Be prudent, Athos, said Aramis. Be easy on that head, replied Athos. You know I am cool enough. Porthos and Aramis resumed their places by the stovepipe. As to Athos, he went out without any mystery, took his horse, which was tied with those of his friends to the fastenings of the shutters, in 4 words convinced the attendant of the necessity of a vanguard for their return, carefully examined the priming of his pistols, drew his sword, and took, like a forlorn hope, the road to the camp. Chapter 45. A conjugal scene. As Athos had foreseen, it was not long before the cardinal came down. He opened the door of the room in which the Musketeers were, and found Porthos playing an earnest game of dice with Aramis. He cast a rapid glance around the room, and perceived that one of his men was missing. "What has become of Monseigneur Athos?" asked he. "Monseigneur," replied Porthos. "He has gone as a scout on account of some words of our host, which made him believe the road was not safe." "And you, what have you done, Monsieur Porthos?" "I have won 5 pistoles of Aramis." "Well, now will you return with me?" "We are at your Eminence's orders." "To horse then, gentlemen, for it is getting late." The attendant was at the door, holding the cardinal's horse by the bridle. At a short distance a group of 2 men and 3 horses appeared in the shade. These were the 2 men who were to conduct Milady to Fort La Pointe, and superintend her embarkation. The attendant confirmed to the cardinal what the 2 musketeers had already said with respect to Athos. The cardinal made an approving gesture, and retraced his route with the same precautions he had used in coming. "Let us leave him to follow the road to the camp protected by his esquire and the 2 musketeers, and return to Athos." For 100 paces he maintained the speed at which he started, but when out of sight he turned his horse to the right, made a circuit, and came back within 20 paces of a high hedge to watch the passage of the little troop. Having recognized the laced hats of his companions and the golden fringe of the cardinal's cloak, he waited till the horsemen had turned the angle of the road, and having lost sight of them, he returned at a gallop to the inn, which was opened to him without hesitation. The host recognized him. "My officer," said Athos, "has forgotten to give a piece of very important information to the lady, and has sent me back to repair his forgetfulness." "Go up," said the host, "she is still in her chamber." Athos availed himself of the permission, ascended the stairs with his lightest step, gained the landing, and through the open door perceived Milady putting on her hat. He entered the chamber and closed the door behind him. At the noise he made in pushing the bolt, Milady turned round. Athos was standing before the door, enveloped in his cloak, with his hat pulled down over his eyes. On seeing this figure, mute and immovable as a statue, Milady was frightened. "Who are you and what do you want?" cried she. "Humph," murmured Athos, "it is certainly she." And letting fall his cloak and raising his hat, he advanced toward Milady. "Do you know me, madam?" said he. Milady made 1 step forward, and then drew back as if she had seen a serpent. "So far well," said Athos. "I perceive you know me." "The Comte de la Fère," murmured Milady, becoming exceedingly pale, and drawing back till the wall prevented her from going any farther. "Yes, Milady," replied Athos, "the Comte de la Fère in person, who comes expressly from the other world to have the pleasure of paying you a visit. Sit down, madam, and let us talk, as the cardinal said." Milady, under the influence of inexpressible terror, sat down without uttering a word. "You certainly are a demon sent upon the earth," said Athos. "Your power is great, I know, but you also know that with the help of God men have often conquered the most terrible demons. You have once before thrown yourself in my path. I thought I had crushed you, madam, but either I was deceived or hell has resuscitated you." Milady at these words, which recalled frightful remembrances, hung down her head with a suppressed groan. "Yes, hell has resuscitated you," continued Athos. "Hell has made you rich, hell has given you another name, hell has almost made you another face, but it has neither effaced the stains from your soul nor the brand from your body." Milady arose as if moved by a powerful spring, and her eyes flashed lightning. Athos remained sitting. "You believed me to be dead, did you not, as I believed you to be?" And the name of Athos as well concealed the Comte de la Fère, as the name Milady Claric concealed and de Broglie. "Was it not so you were called when your honored brother married us?" "Our position is truly a strange one," continued Athos, laughing. "We have only lived up to the present time because we believed each other dead, and because a remembrance is less oppressive than a living creature, though a remembrance is sometimes devouring." "But," said Milady in a hollow, faint voice, "what brings you back to me, and what do you want with me?" "I wish to tell you that though remaining invisible to your eyes, I have not lost sight of you. You know what I have done? I can relate to you, day by day, your actions from your entrance to the service of the cardinal to this evening." A smile of incredulity passed over the pale lips of Milady. "Listen. It was you who cut off the 2 diamond studs from the shoulder of the Duke of Buckingham, It was you who had Madame Bonacieux carried off. It was you who, in love with De Wardes and thinking to pass the night with him, opened the door to Monsieur d'Artagnan. It was you who, believing that De Wardes had deceived you, wished to have him killed by his rival. It was you who, when this rival had discovered your infamous secret, wished to have him killed in his turn by 2 assassins, whom you sent in pursuit of him. It was you who, finding the balls had missed their mark, sent poisoned wine with a forged letter, to make your victim believe that the wine came from his friends. In short, it was you who have but now in this chamber, seated in this chair I now fill, made an engagement with Cardinal Richelieu to cause the Duke of Buckingham to be assassinated, in exchange for the promise he has made you to allow you to assassinate D'Artagnan. Milady was livid. "You must be Satan," cried she. "Perhaps," said Athos, "but at all events listen well to this. Assassinate the Duke of Buckingham, or cause him to be assassinated, I care very little about that. I don't know him. Besides, he is an Englishman. But do not touch with the tip of your finger a single hair of D'Artagnan, who is a faithful friend whom I love and defend, or I swear to you by the head of my father the crime which you shall have endeavored to commit, or shall have committed, shall be the last." "Monsieur d'Artagnan has cruelly insulted me," said Milady in a hollow tone. "Monsieur d'Artagnan shall die." "Indeed. Is it possible to insult you, madame?" said Athos, laughing. "He has insulted you and he shall die." "He shall die," replied Milady, "she first and he afterward." Athos was seized with a kind of vertigo. The sight of this creature, who had nothing of the woman about her, recalled awful remembrances. He thought how one day, in a less dangerous situation than the one in which he was now placed, he had already endeavored to sacrifice her to his honor. His desire for blood returned, burning his brain and pervading his frame like a raging fever. He arose in his turn, reached his hand to his belt, drew forth a pistol and cocked it. Milady, pale as a corpse, endeavored to cry out, but her swollen tongue could utter no more than a hoarse sound which had nothing human in it and resembled the rattle of a wild beast. Motionless against the dark tapestry, with her hair in disorder, she appeared like a horrid image of terror. Athos slowly raised his pistol, stretched out his arm so that the weapon almost touched Milady's forehead, and then, in a voice the more terrible from having the supreme calmness of a fixed resolution, "Madame," said he, "you will this instant deliver to me the paper the cardinal signed, or upon my soul, I will blow your brains out." With another man Milady might have preserved some doubt, but she knew Athos. Nevertheless she remained motionless. "You have 1 second to decide," said he. Milady saw by the contraction of his countenance that the trigger was about to be pulled. She reached her hand quickly to her bosom, drew out a paper, and held it toward Athos. "Take it," said she, "and be accursed." Athos took the paper, returned the pistol to his belt, approached the lamp to be assured that it was the paper, unfolded it, and read, "December 3rd, 1627. It is by my order and for the good of the state that the bearer of this has done what he has done. Richelieu." "And now," said Athos, resuming his cloak and putting on his hat, "now that I have drawn your teeth, viper, bite if you can." And he left the chamber without once looking behind him. At the door he found the 2 men and the spare horse which they held. "Gentlemen," said he, "Monseigneur's order is, you know, to conduct that woman without losing time to Fort La Pointe, and never to leave her till she is on board." As these words agreed wholly with the order they had received, they bowed their heads in sign of assent. With regard to Athos, he leaped lightly into the saddle and set out at full gallop. Only instead of following the road, he went across the fields, urging his horse to the utmost and stopping occasionally to listen. In one of those halts he heard the steps of several horses on the road. He had no doubt it was the cardinal and his escort. He immediately made a new point in advance, rubbed his horse down with some heath and leaves of trees, and placed himself across the road, about 200 paces from the camp. "Who goes there?" cried he as soon as he perceived the horseman. "That is our brave musketeer, I think," said the cardinal. "Yes, monseigneur," said Porthos, "it is he." "Monsieur Athos," said Richelieu, "receive my thanks for the good guard you have kept. Gentlemen, we are arrived. Take the gate on the left. The watchword is, King and Rye." Saying these words, the cardinal saluted the 3 friends with an inclination of his head, and took the right hand, followed by his attendant, for that night he himself slept in the camp. "Well," said Porthos and Aramis together as soon as the cardinal was out of hearing, "well, he signed the paper she required." "I know it," said Athos coolly, "since here it is." And the 3 friends did not exchange another word till they reached their quarters, except to give the watchword to the sentinels. Only they sent Mousqueton to tell Planchet that his master was requested, the instant that he left the trenches, to come to the quarters of the Musketeers. Milady, as Athos had foreseen, on finding the two men that awaited her, made no difficulty in following them. She had had for an instant an inclination to be reconducted to the cardinal, and relate everything to him, but a revelation on her part would bring about a revelation on the part of Athos. She might say that Athos had hanged her, but then Athos would tell that she was branded. She thought it was best to preserve silence, to discreetly set off to accomplish her difficult mission with her usual skill, and then, all things being accomplished to the satisfaction of the cardinal, to come to him and claim her vengeance. In consequence, after having traveled all night, at 7 o'clock she was at the fort of the Point, at 8 o'clock she had embarked, and at 9 the vessel, which with letters of marque from the cardinal was supposed to be sailing for Bayonne, raised anchor, and steered its course toward England. Chapter 46. The Bastion Saint-Gervais. On arriving at the lodgings of his three friends, D'Artagnan found them assembled in the same chamber. Athos was meditating, Porthos was twisting his mustache, Aramis was saying his prayers in a charming little book of hours, bound in blue velvet. "Pardieu, gentlemen," said he. "I hope what you have to tell me is worth the trouble, or else, I warn you, I will not pardon you for making me come here instead of getting a little rest after a night spent in taking and dismantling a bastion. Why were you not there, gentlemen?" "It was warm work. We were in a place where it was not very cold," replied Porthos, giving his mustache a twist which was peculiar to him. "Hush," said Athos. Oh, said D'Artagnan, comprehending the slight frown of the Musketeer. "It appears there is something fresh aboard." "Aramis," said Athos, "you went to breakfast the day before yesterday at the inn of the Parpaillot, I believe?" "Yes." "How did you fare?" "For my part, I ate but little. The day before yesterday was a fish day, and they had nothing but meat." "What?" said Athos. "No fish at a seaport?" "They say," said Aramis, resuming his pious reading, "that the dike which the cardinal is making drives them all out into the open sea." "But that is not quite what I mean to ask you, Aramis," replied Athos. "I want to know if you were left alone, and nobody interrupted you." "Why, I think there were not many intruders." "Yes, Athos, I know what you mean. We shall do very well at the Parpaillot." "Let us go to the Parpaillot, then, for here the walls are like sheets of paper." D'Artagnan, who was accustomed to his friend's manner of acting, and who perceived immediately by a word, a gesture, or a sign from him, that the circumstances were serious, took Athos's arm, and went out without saying anything. Porthos followed, chatting with Aramis. On their way they met Grimaud. Athos made him a sign to come with them. Grimaud, according to custom, obeyed in silence. The poor lad had nearly come to the pass of forgetting how to speak. They arrived at the drinking room of the Parpaillot. It was 7 o'clock in the morning, and daylight began to appear. The three friends ordered breakfast, and went into a room in which the host said they would not be disturbed. Unfortunately, the hour was badly chosen for a private conference. The morning drum had just been beaten. Everyone shook off the drowsiness of night, and to dispel the humid morning air, came to take a drop at the inn. Dragoons, Swiss, guardsmen, musketeers, light horsemen, succeeded one another with a rapidity which might answer the purpose of the host very well, but agreed badly with the views of the four friends. Thus they applied very curtly to the salutations, healths, and jokes of their companions. "I see how it will be," said Athos. "We shall get into some pretty quarrel or other, and we have no need of one just now. D'Artagnan, tell us what sort of a night you have had, and we will describe ours afterward." "Ah, yes," said a light horseman with a glass of brandy in his hand, which he sipped slowly. "I hear you gentlemen of the guards have been in the trenches tonight, and that you did not get much the best of the Rochellais." D'Artagnan looked at Athos to know if he ought to reply to this intruder who thus mixed unasked in their conversation. "Well," said Athos, "don't you hear Monsieur de Busigny, who does you the honor to ask you a question? Relate what has passed during the night, since these gentlemen desire to know it." "Have you not taken a bastion?" said a Swiss who was drinking rum out of a beer glass. "Yes, monsieur," said D'Artagnan, bowing, "we have had that honor. We even have, as you may have heard, introduced a barrel of powder under one of the angles, which in blowing up made a very pretty breach. Without reckoning that as the bastion was not built yesterday all the rest of the building was badly shaken." "And what bastion is it?" asked a dragoon with his saber run through a goose which he was taking to be cooked. "The Bastion Saint-Gervais," replied D'Artagnan, "from behind which the Rochellais annoyed our workmen." "Was that affair hot?" "Yes, moderately so. We lost 5 men, and the Rochellais 8 or 10. "Balzempleu," said the Swiss, who, notwithstanding the admirable collection of oaths possessed by the German language, had acquired a habit of swearing in French. "But it is probable," said the light horseman, "that they will send pioneers this morning to repair the bastion." "Yes, that's probable," said D'Artagnan. "Gentlemen," said Athos, "a wager." "Ah oui, a wager," cried the Swiss. "What is it?" said the light horseman. "Stop a bit," said the dragoon, placing his saber like a spit upon the two large iron dogs which held the firebrands in the chimney. "Stop a bit, I am in it. You cursed host. A dripping pan immediately, that I may not lose a drop of the fat of this estimable bird." "You was right," said the Swiss. "Goose grease is good with baudry." "There," said the dragoon. "Now for the wager. We listen, Monsieur Athos." "Yes, the wager," said the light horseman. "Well, Monsieur de Bissigny, I will bet you," said Athos, "that my three companions, Messrs. Porthos, Aramis, and D'Artagnan, and myself, will go and breakfast in the Bastion Saint-Gervais, and we will remain there an hour by the watch, whatever the enemy may do to dislodge us." Porthos and Aramis looked at each other. They began to comprehend. "But," said D'Artagnan in the ear of Athos, "you are going to get us all killed without mercy." "We are much more likely to be killed," said Athos, "if we do not go." "My faith, gentlemen," said Porthos, turning round upon his chair and twisting his mustache, "that's a fair bet, I hope." "I take it," said M. de Bissigny, "so let us fix the stake." "You are 4 gentlemen," said Athos, "and we are 4, an unlimited dinner for 8. Will that do?" "Capitally," replied M. de Bissigny. "Perfectly," said the dragoon. "That shoots me," said the Swiss. The fourth auditor, who during all this conversation had played a mute part, made a sign of the head in proof that he acquiesced in the proposition. "The breakfast for these gentlemen is ready," said the host. "Well, bring it," said Athos. The host obeyed. Athos called Grimaud, pointed to a large basket which lay in a corner, and made a sign to him to wrap the viands up in the napkins. Grimaud understood that it was to be a breakfast on the grass, took the basket, packed up the viands, added the bottles, and then took the basket on his arm. "But where are you going to eat my breakfast?" asked the host. "What matter if you are paid for it?" said Athos, and he threw 2 pistoles majestically on the table. "Shall I give you the change, my officer?" said the host. "No, only add 2 bottles of champagne, and the difference will be for the napkins." The host had not quite so good a bargain as he had first hoped for, but he made amends by slipping in 2 bottles of Anjou wine instead of 2 bottles of champagne. "Monsieur de Bissigny," said Athos, "will you be so kind as to set your watch with mine, or permit me to regulate mine by yours?" "Which you please, monsieur," said the light horseman, drawing from his fob a very handsome watch, studded with diamonds. "7:30. 35 minutes after 7, said Athos, "by which you perceive I am 5 minutes faster than you." And bowing to all the astonished persons present, the young men took the road to the Bastion Saint-Gervais, followed by Grimaud, who carried the basket, ignorant of where he was going but in the passive obedience which Athos had taught him, not even thinking of asking. As long as they were within the circle of the camp, the 4 friends did not exchange one word. Besides, they were followed by the curious, who, hearing of the wager, were anxious to know how they would come out of it. But when once they passed the line of circumvallation and found themselves in the open plain, D'Artagnan, who was completely ignorant of what was going forward, thought it was time to demand an explanation. "And now, my dear Athos," said he, "do me the kindness to tell me where we are going?" "Why, you see plainly enough we are going to the Bastion." "But what are we going to do there?" "You know well that we go to breakfast there." "But why did we not breakfast at the Parpaillot?" "Because we have very important matters to communicate to one another, and it was impossible to talk 5 minutes in that inn without being annoyed by all those importunate fellows, who keep coming in, saluting you, and addressing you." "Here at least," said Athos, pointing to the Bastion, "they will not come and disturb us." "It appears to me," said D'Artagnan, with that prudence which allied itself in him so naturally with excessive bravery, "that we could have found some retired place on the downs or the seashore, where we should have been seen all 4 conferring together, so that at the end of a quarter of an hour the cardinal would have been informed by his spies that we were holding a council." "Yes," said Aramis, "Athos is right, animadvertuntur in desertis." "A desert would not have been amiss," said Porthos, "but it behooved us to find it. There is no desert where a bird cannot pass over one's head, where a fish cannot leap out of the water, where a rabbit cannot come out of its burrow, and I believe that bird, fish, and rabbit each becomes a spy of the cardinal. Better, then, pursue our enterprise, from which, besides, we cannot retreat without shame. We have made a wager which could not have been foreseen, and of which I defy anyone to divine the true cause. We are going in order to win it, to remain an hour in the bastion. Either we shall be attacked or not. If we are not, we shall have all the time to talk and nobody will hear us, for I guarantee the walls of the bastion have no ears. If we are, we will talk of our affairs just the same. Moreover, in defending ourselves we shall cover ourselves with glory. You see that everything is to our advantage. Yes, said D'Artagnan, but we shall indubitably attract a ball. Well, my dear, replied Athos, you know well that the balls most to be dreaded are not from the enemy. But for such an expedition we surely ought to have brought our muskets. You are stupid, friend Porthos. Why should we load ourselves with a useless burden? I don't find a good musket, 12 cartridges, and a powder flask very useless in the face of an enemy. Well, replied Athos, have you not heard what D'Artagnan said? What did he say? Demanded Porthos. D'Artagnan said that in the attack of last night 8 or 10 Frenchmen were killed, and as many Rochellais. What then? The bodies were not plundered, were they? It appears the conquerors had something else to do. Well, we shall find their muskets, their cartridges, and their flasks, and instead of 4 musketons and 12 balls, we shall have 15 guns and 100 charges to fire. Oh, Athos, said Aramis, truly you are a great man. Porthos nodded in sign of agreement. D'Artagnan alone did not seem convinced. Grimaud no doubt shared the misgivings of the young man, for seeing that they continued to advance toward the bastion, something he had till then doubted, he pulled his master by the skirt of his coat. Where are we going? Asked he by a gesture. Athos pointed to the bastion. But, said Grimaud in the same silent dialect, we shall leave our skins there. Athos raised his eyes and his finger toward heaven. Grimaud put his basket on the ground and sat down with a shake of the head. Athos took a pistol from his belt, looked to see if it was properly primed, cocked it, and placed the muzzle close to Grimaud's ear. Grimaud was on his legs again as if by a spring. Athos then made him a sign to take up his basket and to walk on first. Grimaud obeyed. All that Grimaud gained by this momentary pantomime was to pass from the rear guard to the vanguard. Arrived at the bastion, the 4 friends turned round. More than 300 soldiers of all kinds were assembled at the gate of the camp, and in a separate group might be distinguished M. de Bissigny, the dragoon, the Swiss, and the 4th better. Athos took off his hat, placed it on the end of his sword, and waved it in the air. All the spectators returned him his salute, accompanying this courtesy with a loud hurrah which was audible to the 4, after which all 4 disappeared in the bastion, whither Grimaud had preceded them. Chapter 47. The Council of the Musketeers. As Athos had foreseen, the bastion was only occupied by a dozen corpses, French and Rochellais. Gentlemen, said Athos, who had assumed the command of the expedition, while Grimaud spreads the table, let us begin by collecting the guns and cartridges together. We can talk while performing that necessary task. These gentlemen, added he, pointing to the bodies, cannot hear us. But we could throw them into the ditch, said Porthos, after having assured ourselves they have nothing in their pockets. Yes, said Athos, that's Grimaud's business. Well then, cried D'Artagnan, pray let Grimaud search them and throw them over the walls. Heaven forfend, said Athos, they may serve us. These bodies serve us, said Porthos. You are mad, dear friend. Judge not rashly, say the gospel and the cardinal, replied Athos. How many guns, gentlemen? 12, replied Aramis. How many shots? 100. That's quite as many as we shall want. Let us load the guns. The 4 musketeers went to work, and as they were loading the last musket Grimaud announced that the breakfast was ready. Athos replied, always by gestures, that that was well, and indicated to Grimaud, by pointing to a turret that resembled a pepper caster, that he was to stand as sentinel. Only, to alleviate the tediousness of the duty, Athos allowed him to take a loaf, 2 cutlets, and a bottle of wine. And now to table, said Athos. The 4 friends seated themselves on the ground with their legs crossed like Turks, or even tailors. And now, said D'Artagnan, as there is no longer any fear of being overheard, I hope you are going to let me into your secret. I hope at the same time to procure you amusement and glory, gentlemen, said Athos. I have induced you to take a charming promenade. Here is a delicious breakfast, and yonder are 500 persons, as you may see through the loopholes, taking us for heroes or madmen, 2 classes of imbeciles greatly resembling each other. But the secret, said D'Artagnan. The secret is, said Athos, that I saw Milady last night. D'Artagnan was lifting a glass to his lips, but at the name of Milady, his hand trembled so, that he was obliged to put the glass on the ground again for fear of spilling the contents. You saw your why. Hush, interrupted Athos. You forget, my dear, you forget that these gentlemen are not initiated into my family affairs like yourself. I have seen Milady. Where? Demanded D'Artagnan. Within 2 leagues of this place, at the Inn of the Red Dovecot. In that case I am lost, said D'Artagnan. Not so bad yet, replied Athos, for by this time she must have quit the shores of France. D'Artagnan breathed again. But after all, asked Porthos, who is Milady? A charming woman, said Athos, sipping a glass of sparkling wine. Villainous host, cried he. He has given us Anjou wine instead of champagne and fancies we know no better. Yes, continued he, a charming woman who entertained kind views toward our friend D'Artagnan, who, on his part, has given her some offense for which she tried to revenge herself a month ago by having him killed by 2 musket shots, a week ago by trying to poison him, and yesterday by demanding his head of the cardinal. What? By demanding my head of the cardinal? Cried D'Artagnan, pale with terror. Yes, that is true as the gospel, said Porthos. I heard her with my own ears. I also, said Aramis. Then, said D'Artagnan, letting his arm fall with discouragement, it is useless to struggle longer. I may as well blow my brains out and all will be over. That's the last folly to be committed, said Athos, seeing it is the only one for which there is no remedy. But I can never escape, said D'Artagnan, with such enemies. First, my stranger of Meung, then De Wardes to whom I have given 3 sword wounds, next Milady whose secret I have discovered, finally the cardinal whose vengeance I have balked. Well, said Athos, that only makes 4 and we are 4, 1 for 1. Pardieu. If we may believe the signs Grimaud is making, we are about to have to do with a very different number of people. What is it, Grimaud? Considering the gravity of the occasion, I permit you to speak, my friend, but be laconic, I beg. What do you see? A troop. Of how many persons? 20 men. What sort of men? 16 pioneers for soldiers. How far distant? 500 paces. Good. We have just time to finish this fowl and to drink 1 glass of wine to your health, D'Artagnan. To your health, repeated Porthos and Aramis. Well then, to my health. Although I am very much afraid that your good wishes will not be of great service to me. Bah, said Athos. God is great, as say the followers of Mohammed, and the future is in his hands. Then, swallowing the contents of his glass, which he put down close to him, Athos arose carelessly, took the musket next to him, and drew near to one of the loopholes. Porthos, Aramis and D'Artagnan followed his example. As to Grimaud, he received orders to place himself behind the 4 friends in order to reload their weapons. Pardieu, said Athos, it was hardly worth while to distribute ourselves for 20 fellows armed with pickaxes, mattocks, and shovels. Grimaud had only to make them a sign to go away, and I am convinced they would have left us in peace. I doubt that, replied D'Artagnan, for they are advancing very resolutely. Besides, in addition to the pioneers, there are 4 soldiers and a brigadier, armed with muskets. That's because they don't see us, said Athos. My faith, said Aramis, I must confess I feel a great repugnance to fire on these poor devils of civilians. He is a bad priest, said Porthos, who has pity for heretics. In truth, said Athos, Aramis is right. I will warn them. What the devil are you going to do? Cried D'Artagnan. You will be shot. But Athos heeded not his advice. Mounting on the breach, with his musket in one hand and his hat in the other, he said, bowing courteously and addressing the soldiers and the pioneers, who, astonished at this apparition, stopped 50 paces from the bastion, Gentlemen, a few friends and myself are about to breakfast in this bastion. Now, you know nothing is more disagreeable than being disturbed when one is at breakfast. We request you then, if you really have business here, to wait till we have finished our repast, or to come again a short time hence, unless, which would be far better, you form the salutary resolution to quit the side of the rebels, and come and drink with us to the health of the King of France. Take care, Athos, cried D'Artagnan. Don't you see they are aiming? Yes, yes, said Athos, but they are only civilians, very bad marksmen who will be sure not to hit me. In fact, at the same instant 4 shots were fired, and the balls were flattened against the wall around Athos, but not one touched him. 4 shots replied to them almost instantaneously, but much better aimed than those of the aggressors. 3 soldiers fell dead and one of the pioneers was wounded. Grimaud, said Athos, still on the breach, another musket. Grimaud immediately obeyed. On their part, the 3 friends had reloaded their arms. A second discharge followed the first. The brigadier and 2 pioneers fell dead. The rest of the troop took to flight. Now, gentlemen, a sortie, cried Athos. And the four friends rushed out of the fort, gained the field of battle, picked up the 4 muskets of the privates and the half-pike of the brigadier, and convinced that the fugitives would not stop till they reached the city, turned again toward the bastion, bearing with them the trophies of their victory. "Reload the muskets, Grimaud," said Athos, "and we, gentlemen, will go on with our breakfast and resume our conversation. Where were we?" "I recollect you were saying," said D'Artagnan, "that after having demanded my head of the cardinal, Milady had quit the shores of France. Whither goes she?" added he, strongly interested in the route Milady followed. "She goes into England," said Athos. "With what view?" "With the view of assassinating or causing to be assassinated the Duke of Buckingham." D'Artagnan uttered an exclamation of surprise and indignation. "But this is infamous," cried he. "As to that," said Athos, "I beg you to believe that I care very little about it. Now you have done, Grimaud, take our brigadier's half-pike, tie a napkin to it, and plant it on top of our bastion, that these rebels of Rochellais may see that they have to deal with brave and loyal soldiers of the king." Grimaud obeyed without replying. An instant afterward, the white flag was floating over the heads of the 4 friends. A thunder of applause saluted its appearance. Half the camp was at the barrier. "How?" replied D'Artagnan. "You care little if she kills Buckingham or causes him to be killed. But the Duke is our friend. The Duke is English, the Duke fights against us. Let her do what she likes with the Duke. I care no more about him than an empty bottle." And Athos threw 15 paces from him an empty bottle from which he had poured the last drop into his glass. "A moment," said D'Artagnan. "I will not abandon Buckingham thus. He gave us some very fine horses." "And moreover very handsome saddles," said Porthos, who at the moment wore on his cloak the lace of his own. "Besides," said Aramis, "God desires the conversion and not the death of a sinner." "Amen," said Athos, "and we will return to that subject later, if such be your pleasure. But what for the moment engaged my attention most earnestly, and I am sure you will understand me, D'Artagnan, was the getting from this woman a kind of carte blanche which she had extorted from the cardinal, and by means of which she could with impunity get rid of you and perhaps of us." "But this creature must be a demon," said Porthos, holding out his plate to Aramis, who was cutting up a fowl. "And this carte blanche," said D'Artagnan, "this carte blanche, does it remain in her hands?" "No, it passed into mine. I will not say without trouble, for if I did I should tell a lie. My dear Athos, I shall no longer count the number of times I am indebted to you for my life." "Then it was to go to her that you left us?" said Aramis. "Exactly." "And you have that letter of the cardinal?" said D'Artagnan. "Here it is," said Athos, and he took the invaluable paper from the pocket of his uniform. D'Artagnan unfolded it with one hand, whose trembling he did not even attempt to conceal, to read. December 3rd, 1627. "It is by my order and for the good of the state that the bearer of this has done what he has done. Richelieu." "In fact," said Aramis, "it is an absolution according to rule." "That paper must be torn to pieces," said D'Artagnan, who fancied he read in it his sentence of death. "On the contrary," said Athos, "it must be preserved carefully. I would not give up this paper if covered with as many gold pieces." "And what will she do now?" asked the young man. "Why," replied Athos carelessly, "she is probably going to write to the cardinal that a damned musketeer named Athos has taken her safe conduct from her by force. She will advise him in the same letter to get rid of his 2 friends, Aramis and Porthos, at the same time. The cardinal will remember that these are the same men who have often crossed his path, and then some fine morning he will arrest D'Artagnan, and for fear he should feel lonely, he will send us to keep him company in the Bastille. Go to—" "It appears to me you make dull jokes, my dear," said Porthos. "I do not jest," said Athos. "Do you know," said Porthos, "that to twist that damned Milady's neck would be a smaller sin than to twist those of these poor devils of Huguenots, who have committed no other crime than singing in French the psalms we sing in Latin?" "What says the abbé?" asked Athos quietly. "I say I am entirely of Porthos's opinion," replied Aramis. "And I too," said D'Artagnan. "Fortunately she is far off," said Porthos, "for I confess she would worry me if she were here." "She worries me in England as well as in France," said Athos. "She worries me everywhere," said D'Artagnan. "But when you held her in your power, why did you not drown her, strangle her, hang her?" said Porthos. "It is only the dead who do not return." "You think so, Porthos?" replied the Musketeer, with a sad smile which D'Artagnan alone understood. "I have an idea," said D'Artagnan. "What is it?" said the Musketeers. "To arms!" cried Grimaud. The young men sprang up and seized their muskets. This time a small troop advanced, consisting of from 20 to 25 men, but they were not pioneers, they were soldiers of the garrison. "Shall we return to the camp?" said Porthos. "I don't think the sides are equal." "Impossible for 3 reasons," replied Athos. "The first, that we have not finished breakfast. The second, that we still have some very important things to say, and the third, that it yet wants 10 minutes before the lapse of the hour." "Well then," said Aramis, "we must form a plan of battle." "That's very simple," replied Athos. "As soon as the enemy are within musket shot, we must fire upon them. If they continue to advance, we must fire again. We must fire as long as we have loaded guns. If those who remain of the troop persist in coming to the assault, we will allow the besiegers to get as far as the ditch, and then we will push down upon their heads that strip of wall which keeps its perpendicular by a miracle." "Bravo!" cried Porthos. "Decidedly, Athos, you were born to be a general, and the cardinal, who fancies himself a great soldier, is nothing beside you." "Gentlemen," said Athos, "no divided attention, I beg. Let each one pick out his man." "I cover mine," said D'Artagnan. "And I mine," said Porthos. "And I idem," said Aramis. "Fire then," said Athos. The 4 muskets made but one report, but 4 men fell. The drum immediately beat, and the little troop advanced at charging pace. Then the shots were repeated without regularity, but always aimed with the same accuracy. Nevertheless, as if they had been aware of the numerical weakness of the friends, the Rochellais continued to advance in quick time. With every 3 shots at least 2 men fell, but the march of those who remained was not slackened. Arrived at the foot of the bastion, there were still more than a dozen of the enemy. A last discharge welcomed them but did not stop them. They jumped into the ditch and prepared to scale the breach. "Now, my friends," said Athos, "finish them at a blow. To the wall, to the wall." And the 4 friends, seconded by Grimaud, pushed with the barrels of their muskets an enormous sheet of the wall, which bent as if pushed by the wind, and detaching itself from its base, fell with a horrible crash into the ditch. Then a fearful crash was heard, a cloud of dust mounted toward the sky, and all was over. "Can we have destroyed them all, from the first to the last?" said Athos. "My faith, it appears so," said D'Artagnan. "No," cried Porthos, "there go 3 or 4 limping away." In fact, 3 or 4 of these unfortunate men, covered with dirt and blood, fled along the hollow way and at length regained the city. These were all who were left of the little troop. Athos looked at his watch. "Gentlemen," said he, "we have been here an hour, and our wager is won, but we will be fair players. Besides, D'Artagnan has not told us his idea yet." And the Musketeer, with his usual coolness, reseated himself before the remains of the breakfast. "My idea?" said D'Artagnan. "Yes, you said you had an idea," said Athos. "Oh, I remember," said D'Artagnan. "Well, I will go to England a second time. I will go and find Buckingham." "You shall not do that, D'Artagnan," said Athos coolly. "And why not? Have I not been there once?" "Yes, but at that period we were not at war. At that period Buckingham was an ally and not an enemy. What you would now do amounts to treason." D'Artagnan perceived the force of this reasoning and was silent. "But," said Porthos, "I think I have an idea in my turn." "Silence for Monsieur Porthos's idea," said Aramis. "I will ask leave of absence of Monsieur de Treville, on some pretext or other which you must invent. I am not very clever at pretexts. Milady does not know me, I will get access to her without her suspecting me, and when I catch my beauty, I will strangle her." "Well," replied Athos, "I am not far from approving the idea of Monsieur Porthos." "For shame," said Aramis. "Kill a woman? No, listen to me, I have the true idea." "Let us see your idea, Aramis," said Athos, who felt much deference for the young Musketeer. "We must inform the queen." "Ah, my faith, yes," said Porthos and D'Artagnan at the same time. "We are coming nearer to it now." "Inform the queen," said Athos. "And how? Have we relations with the court? Could we send anyone to Paris without its being known in the camp? From here to Paris it is 140 leagues. Before our letter was at Angers we should be in a dungeon. As to remitting a letter with safety to Her Majesty," said Aramis, coloring, "I will take that upon myself. I know a clever person at Tours." Aramis stopped on seeing Athos smile. "Well, do you not adopt this means, Athos?" said D'Artagnan. "I do not reject it altogether," said Athos, "but I wish to remind Aramis that he cannot quit the camp, and that nobody but one of ourselves is trustworthy, that 2 hours after the messenger has set out, all the Capuchins, all the police, all the black caps of the cardinal, will know your letter by heart, and you and your clever person will be arrested. Without reckoning, objected Porthos, that the Queen would save Monsieur de Buckingham, but would take no heed of us. Gentlemen, said D'Artagnan, what Porthos says is full of sense. Ah, but what's going on in the city yonder? Said Athos. They are beating the general alarm. The four friends listened, and the sound of the drum plainly reached them. You see, they are going to send a whole regiment against us, said Athos. You don't think of holding out against a whole regiment, do you? Said Porthos. Why not? Said the Musketeer. I feel myself quite in a humor for it, and I would hold out before an army if we had taken the precaution to bring a dozen more bottles of wine. Upon my word, the drum draws near, said D'Artagnan. Let it come, said Athos. It is a quarter of an hour's journey from here to the city, consequently a quarter of an hour's journey from the city to hither. That is more than time enough for us to devise a plan. If we go from this place we shall never find another so suitable. Stop. I have it, gentlemen, the right idea has just occurred to me. Tell us. Allow me to give Grimaud some indispensable orders. Athos made a sign for his lackey to approach. Grimaud, said Athos, pointing to the bodies which lay under the wall of the bastion, take those gentlemen, set them up against the wall, put their hats upon their heads and their guns in their hands. Oh, the great man, cried D'Artagnan. I comprehend now. You comprehend? Said Porthos. And do you comprehend, Grimaud? Said Aramis. Grimaud made a sign in the affirmative. That's all that is necessary, said Athos. Now for my idea. I should like, however, to comprehend, said Porthos. That is useless. Yes, yes. Athos's idea, cried Aramis and D'Artagnan at the same time. This milady, this woman, this creature, this demon has a brother-in-law, as I think you told me, D'Artagnan? Yes, I know him very well, and I also believe that he has not a very warm affection for his sister-in-law. There is no harm in that. If he detested her, it would be all the better, replied Athos. In that case we are as well off as we wish. And yet, said Porthos, I would like to know what Grimaud is about. Silence, Porthos, said Aramis. What is her brother-in-law's name? Lord de Winter. Where is he now? He returned to London at the first sound of war. Well, there's just the man we want, said Athos. It is he whom we must warn. We will have him informed that his sister-in-law is on the point of having someone assassinated, and beg him not to lose sight of her. There is in London, I hope, some establishment like that of the Magdalens or of the Repentant Daughters. He must place his sister in one of these, and we shall be in peace. Yes, said D'Artagnan, till she comes out. Ah, my faith, said Athos, you require too much, D'Artagnan. I have given you all I have, and I beg leave to tell you that this is the bottom of my sack. But I think it would be still better, said Aramis, to inform the Queen and Lord de Winter at the same time. Yes, but who is to carry the letter to Tours and who to London? I answer for Bazin, said Aramis. And I for Planchet, said D'Artagnan. I, said Porthos, if we cannot leave the camp our lackeys may. To be sure they may, and this very day we will write the letters, said Aramis. Give the lackeys money and they will start. We will give them money, replied Athos. Have you any money? The four friends looked at one another, and a cloud came over the brows which but lately had been so cheerful. Look out, cried D'Artagnan. I see black points and red points moving yonder. Why did you talk of a regiment, Athos? It is a veritable army. My faith, yes, said Athos. There they are. See the sneaks come without drum or trumpet. Ah, have you finished, Grimaud? Grimaud made a sign in the affirmative, and pointed to a dozen bodies which he had set up in the most picturesque attitudes. Some carried arms, others seemed to be taking aim, and the remainder appeared merely to be sword in hand. Bravo, said Athos. That does honor to your imagination. All very well, said Porthos, but I should like to understand. Let us decamp first, and you will understand afterward. A moment, gentlemen, a moment. Give Grimaud time to clear away the breakfast. Ah, said Aramis. The black points and the red points are visibly enlarging. I am of D'Artagnan's opinion. We have no time to lose in regaining our camp. My faith, said Athos, I have nothing to say against a retreat. We bet upon 1 hour, and we have stayed an hour and a half. Nothing can be said. Let us be off, gentlemen, let us be off. Grimaud was already ahead with the basket and the dessert. The four friends followed 10 paces behind him. What the devil shall we do now, gentlemen? Cried Athos. Have you forgotten anything? Said Aramis. The white flag, morbleu. We must not leave a flag in the hands of the enemy, even if that flag be but a napkin. And Athos ran back to the bastion, mounted the platform and bore off the flag. But as the Rochellais had arrived within musket range, they opened a terrible fire upon this man, who appeared to expose himself for pleasure's sake. But Athos might be said to bear a charmed life. The balls passed and whistled all around him, not one struck him. Athos waved his flag, turning his back on the guards of the city, and saluting those of the camp. On both sides loud cries arose, on the one side cries of anger, on the other cries of enthusiasm. A second discharge followed the first, and 3 balls, by passing through it, made the napkin really a flag. Cries were heard from the camp, "Come down! Come down!" Athos came down. His friends, who anxiously awaited him, saw him returned with joy. "Come along, Athos, come along!" cried D'Artagnan. "Now we have found everything except money, it would be stupid to be killed." But Athos continued to march majestically whatever remarks his companions made, and they, finding their remarks useless, regulated their pace by his. Grimaud and his basket were far in advance, out of the range of the balls. At the end of an instant they heard a furious fusillade. "What's that?" asked Porthos. "What are they firing at now? I hear no balls whistle and I see nobody." "They are firing at the corpses," replied Athos. "But the dead cannot return their fire." "Certainly not. They will then fancy it is an ambuscade, they will deliberate, and by the time they have found out the pleasantry, we shall be out of the range of their balls. That renders it useless to get a pleurisy by too much haste." "Oh, I comprehend now," said the astonished Porthos. "That's lucky," said Athos, shrugging his shoulders. On their part, the French, on seeing the 4 friends return at such a step, uttered cries of enthusiasm. At length a fresh discharge was heard, and this time the balls came rattling among the stones around the 4 friends, and whistling sharply in their ears. The Rochellais had at last taken possession of the bastion. "These Rochellais are bungling fellows," said Athos. "How many have we killed of them? A dozen? Or 15? How many did we crush under the wall? 8 or 10. And in exchange for all that not even a scratch. Ah, but what is the matter with your hand, D'Artagnan? It bleeds, seemingly." "Oh, it's nothing," said D'Artagnan. "A spent ball? Not even that." "What is it, then?" We have said that Athos loved D'Artagnan like a child, and this somber and inflexible personage felt the anxiety of a parent for the young man. "Only grazed a little," replied D'Artagnan. "My fingers were caught between 2 stones, that of the wall and that of my ring, and the skin was broken." "That comes of wearing diamonds, my master," said Athos disdainfully. "Ah, to be sure," cried Porthos. "There is a diamond. Why the devil, then, do we plague ourselves about money when there is a diamond?" "Stop a bit," said Aramis. "Well thought of, Porthos. This time you have an idea." "Undoubtedly," said Porthos, drawing himself up at Athos's compliment. "As there is a diamond, let us sell it." "But," said D'Artagnan, "it is the Queen's diamond." "The stronger reason why it should be sold," replied Athos. "The Queen saving Monsieur de Buckingham, her lover, nothing more just. The Queen saving us, her friends, nothing more moral. Let us sell the diamond. What says Monsieur the Abbé?" "I don't ask Porthos, his opinion has been given." "Why, I think," said Aramis, blushing as usual, "that his ring not coming from a mistress, and consequently not being a love token, D'Artagnan may sell it." "My dear Aramis, you speak like theology personified." "Your advice, then, is—" "To sell the diamond," replied Aramis. "Well, then," said D'Artagnan gaily, "let us sell the diamond and say no more about it." The fusillade continued, but the 4 friends were out of reach, and the Rochellais only fired to appease their consciences. My faith, it was time that idea came into Porthos's head. "Here we are at the camp. Therefore, gentlemen, not a word more of this affair. We are observed, they are coming to meet us. We shall be carried in triumph." In fact, as we have said, the whole camp was in motion. More than 2,000 persons had assisted, as at a spectacle, in this fortunate but wild undertaking of the 4 friends, an undertaking of which they were far from suspecting the real motive. Nothing was heard but cries of "Live the Musketeers! Live the Guards!" De Bissigny was the first to come and shake Athos by the hand, and acknowledge that the wager was lost. The dragoon and the Swiss followed him, and all their comrades followed the dragoon and the Swiss. There was nothing but felicitations, pressures of the hand, and embraces. There was no end to the inextinguishable laughter at the Rochellais. The tumult at length became so great that the cardinal fancied there must be some riot, and sent La Houdinière, his captain of the guards, to inquire what was going on. The affair was described to the messenger with all the effervescence of enthusiasm. "Well?" asked the cardinal on seeing La Houdinière return. "Well, monseigneur," replied the latter, "Three Musketeers and a guardsman laid a wager with Monsieur de Bissigny that they would go and breakfast in the Bastion Saint-Gervais, and while breakfasting they held it for 2 hours against the enemy, and have killed I don't know how many Rochellais. Did you inquire the names of those 3 Musketeers?" "Yes, monseigneur." "What are their names?" "Messrs. Athos, Porthos, and Aramis." "Still my 3 brave fellows?" murmured the cardinal. "And the guardsman?" "D'Artagnan." "Still my young scapegrace." "Positively, these 4 men must be on my side." The same evening the cardinal spoke to M. de Treville of the exploit of the morning, which was the talk of the whole camp. De Treville, who had received the account of the adventure from the mouths of the heroes of it, related it in all its details to his eminence, not forgetting the episode of the napkin. "That's well, Monsieur de Treville," said the cardinal. "Pray let that napkin be sent to me. I will have 3 fleur-de-lis embroidered on it in gold, and will give it to your company as a standard." "Monseigneur," said M. de Treville, "that will be unjust to the guardsmen. Monsieur d'Artagnan is not with me. He serves under Monsieur de Cessert." "Well then take him," said the cardinal. "When 4 men are so much attached to one another, it is only fair that they should serve in the same company." That same evening M. de Treville announced this good news to the 3 Musketeers and D'Artagnan, inviting all 4 to breakfast with him next morning. D'Artagnan was beside himself with joy. We know that the dream of his life had been to become a musketeer. The 3 friends were likewise greatly delighted. "My faith," said D'Artagnan to Athos, "you had a triumphant idea. As you said, we have acquired glory, and were enabled to carry on a conversation of the highest importance, which we can resume now without anybody suspecting us, for with the help of God, we shall henceforth pass for cardinalists." That evening D'Artagnan went to present his respects to M. de Cessert, and inform him of his promotion. M. de Cessert, who esteemed D'Artagnan, made him offers of help, as this change would entail expenses for equipment. D'Artagnan refused, but thinking the opportunity a good one, he begged him to have the diamond he put into his hand valued, as he wished to turn it into money. The next day M. de Cessert's valet came to D'Artagnan's lodging, and gave him a bag containing 7,000 livres. This was the price of the Queen's diamond. Chapter 48. A Family Affair. Athos had invented the phrase family affair. A family affair was not subject to the investigation of the cardinal. A family affair concerned nobody. People might employ themselves in a family affair before all the world. Therefore Athos had invented the phrase family affair. Aramis had discovered the idea, the lackeys. Porthos had discovered the means, the diamond. D'Artagnan alone had discovered nothing. He, ordinarily the most inventive of the 4, but it must be also said that the very name of Milady paralyzed him. No, we were mistaken. He had discovered a purchaser for his diamond. The breakfast at M. de Treville's was as gay and cheerful as possible. D'Artagnan already wore his uniform, for being nearly of the same size as Aramis, and as Aramis was so liberally paid by the publisher who purchased his poem as to allow him to buy everything double, he sold his friend a complete outfit. D'Artagnan would have been at the height of his wishes if he had not constantly seen Milady like a dark cloud hovering in the horizon. After breakfast, it was agreed that they should meet again in the evening at Athos's lodging, and there finish their plans. D'Artagnan passed the day in exhibiting his musketeer's uniform in every street of the camp. In the evening, at the appointed hour, the 4 friends met. There only remained 3 things to decide: what they should write to Milady's brother, what they should write to the clever person at Tours, and which should be the lackeys to carry the letters. Everyone offered his own. Athos talked of the discretion of Grimaud, who never spoke a word but when his master unlocked his mouth. Porthos boasted of the strength of Mousqueton, who was big enough to thrash 4 men of ordinary size. Aramis, confiding in the address of Bazin, made a pompous eulogium on his candidate. Finally, D'Artagnan had entire faith in the bravery of Planchet, and reminded them of the manner in which he had conducted himself in the ticklish affair of Boulogne. These 4 virtues disputed the prize for a length of time, and gave birth to magnificent speeches which we do not repeat here for fear they should be deemed too long. "Unfortunately," said Athos, "he whom we send must possess in himself alone the 4 qualities united. But where is such a lackey to be found?" "Not to be found," cried Athos. "I know it well, so take Grimaud. Take Mousqueton. Take Bazin. Take Planchet. Planchet is brave and shrewd. They are 2 qualities out of the 4. "Gentlemen," said Aramis, The principal question is not to know which of our 4 lackeys is the most discreet, the most strong, the most clever, or the most brave. The principal thing is to know which loves money the best. What Aramis says is very sensible, replied Athos. We must speculate upon the faults of people and not upon their virtues. Monsieur Abbé, you are a great moralist. Doubtless, said Aramis, for we not only require to be well served in order to succeed, but moreover not to fail, for in case of failure heads are in question, not for our lackeys. Speak lower, Aramis, said Athos. That's wise, not for the lackeys, resumed Aramis, but for the master, for the masters we may say. Are our lackeys sufficiently devoted to us to risk their lives for us? No. My faith, said D'Artagnan. I would almost answer for Planchet. Well, my dear friend, add to his natural devotedness a good sum of money, and then instead of answering for him once, answer for him twice. Why, good God! You will be deceived just the same, said Athos, who was an optimist when things were concerned, and a pessimist when men were in question. They will promise everything for the sake of the money, and on the road fear will prevent them from acting. Once taken they will be pressed. When pressed they will confess everything. What the devil? We are not children. To reach England, Athos lowered his voice, all France, covered with spies and creatures of the cardinal, must be crossed. A passport for embarkation must be obtained, and the party must be acquainted with English in order to ask the way to London. Really, I think the thing very difficult. Not at all, cried D'Artagnan, who was anxious the matter should be accomplished. On the contrary, I think it very easy. It would be, no doubt, parbleu, if we write to Lord de Winter about affairs of vast importance, of the horrors of the cardinal. Speak lower, said Athos. Of intrigues and secrets of state, continued D'Artagnan, complying with the recommendation. There can be no doubt we would all be broken on the wheel, but for God's sake do not forget, as you yourself said, Athos, that we only write to him concerning a family affair, that we only write to him to entreat that as soon as Milady arrives in London he will put it out of her power to injure us. I will write to him then nearly in these terms. Let us see, said Athos, assuming in advance a critical look. Monsieur and dear friend. Ah yes. Dear friend to an Englishman, interrupted Athos. Well commenced. Bravo, D'Artagnan. Only with that word you would be quartered instead of being broken on the wheel. Well, perhaps. I will say then, monsieur, quite short. You may even say, my lord, replied Athos, who stickled for propriety. My lord, do you remember the little goat pasture of the Luxembourg? Good, the Luxembourg. One might believe this is an allusion to the Queen Mother. That's ingenious, said Athos. Well then, we will put simply, my lord, do you remember a certain little enclosure where your life was spared? My dear D'Artagnan, you will never make anything but a very bad secretary. Where your life was spared. For shame. That's unworthy. A man of spirit is not to be reminded of such services. A benefit reproached is an offense committed. The devil, said D'Artagnan, you are insupportable. If the letter must be written under your censure, my faith, I renounce the task. And you will do right. Handle the musket and the sword, my dear fellow. You will come off splendidly at those 2 exercises, but pass the pen over to Monsieur Abbé. That's his province. Aye, said Porthos. Pass the pen to Aramis, who writes theses in Latin. Well, so be it, said D'Artagnan. Draw up this note for us, Aramis, but by our Holy Father the Pope, cut it short, for I shall prune you in my turn, I warn you. I ask no better, said Aramis, with that ingenious air of confidence which every poet has in himself, but let me be properly acquainted with the subject. I have heard here and there that this sister-in-law was a hussy. I have obtained proof of it by listening to her conversation with the cardinal. Lower. Sacre bleu, said Athos. But, continued Aramis, the details escape me. And me also, said Porthos. D'Artagnan and Athos looked at each other for some time in silence. At length Athos, after serious reflection and becoming more pale than usual, made a sign of assent to D'Artagnan, who by it understood he was at liberty to speak. Well, this is what you have to say, said D'Artagnan. My lord, your sister-in-law is an infamous woman, who wished to have you killed that she might inherit your wealth, but she could not marry your brother, being already married in France and having been— D'Artagnan stopped as if seeking for the word and looked at Athos. Repudiated by her husband, said Athos. Because she had been branded, continued D'Artagnan. Bah, cried Porthos. Impossible. What do you say, that she wanted to have her brother-in-law killed? Yes. She was married? Asked Aramis. Yes. And her husband found out that she had a fleur-de-lis on her shoulder? cried Porthos. Yes. These 3 yes had been pronounced by Athos, each with a sadder intonation. And who has seen this fleur-de-lis? Inquired Aramis. D'Artagnan and I. Or rather, to observe the chronological order, I and D'Artagnan, replied Athos. And does the husband of this frightful creature still live? Said Aramis. He still lives. Are you quite sure of it? I am he. There was a moment of cold silence, during which everyone was affected according to his nature. This time, said Athos, first breaking the silence, D'Artagnan has given us an excellent program, and the letter must be written at once. The devil? You are right, Athos, said Aramis, and it is a rather difficult matter. The Chancellor himself would be puzzled how to write such a letter, and yet the Chancellor draws up an official report very readily. Never mind. Be silent, I will write. Aramis accordingly took the quill, reflected for a few moments, wrote 8 or 10 lines in a charming little female hand, and then with a voice soft and slow, as if each word had been scrupulously weighed, he read the following. My lord, the person who writes these few lines had the honor of crossing swords with you in the little enclosure of the Rue d'Offre. As you have several times since declared yourself the friend of that person, he thinks it his duty to respond to that friendship by sending you important information. Twice you have nearly been the victim of a near relative, whom you believe to be your heir because you are ignorant that before she contracted a marriage in England she was already married in France. But the 3rd time, which is the present, you may succumb. Your relative left La Rochelle for England during the night. Watch her arrival, for she has great and terrible projects. If you require to know positively what she is capable of, read her past history on her left shoulder. Well, now that will do wonderfully well, said Athos. My dear Aramis, you have the pen of a Secretary of State. Lord de Winter will now be upon his guard if the letter should reach him, and even if it should fall into the hands of the cardinal, we shall not be compromised. But as the lackey who goes may make us believe he has been to London and may stop at Châtellerault, let us give him only half the sum promised him with the letter, with an agreement that he shall have the other half in exchange for the reply. Have you the diamond? Continued Athos. I have what is still better. I have the price. And D'Artagnan threw the bag upon the table. At the sound of the gold Aramis raised his eyes and Porthos started. As to Athos, he remained unmoved. How much in that little bag? 7,000 livres in Louis of 12 francs. 7,000 livres, cried Porthos. That poor little diamond was worth 7,000 livres? It appears so, said Athos, since here they are. I don't suppose that our friend D'Artagnan has added any of his own to the amount. But, gentlemen, in all this, said D'Artagnan, we do not think of the Queen. Let us take some heed of the welfare of her dear Buckingham. That is the least we owe her. That's true, said Athos, but that concerns Aramis. Well, replied the latter, blushing, what must I say? Oh, that's simple enough, replied Athos. Write a second letter for that clever personage who lives at Tours. Aramis resumed his pen, reflected a little, and wrote the following lines, which he immediately submitted to the approbation of his friends. My dear cousin. Ah, said Athos. This clever person is your relative, then? Cousin german. Go on to your cousin, then. Aramis continued. My dear cousin, His Eminence, the Cardinal, whom God preserve for the happiness of France and the confusion of the enemies of the kingdom, is on the point of putting an end to the hectic rebellion of La Rochelle. It is probable that the succor of the English fleet will never even arrive in sight of the place. I will even venture to say that I am certain M. de Buckingham will be prevented from setting out by some great event. His Eminence is the most illustrious politician of times past, of times present, and probably of times to come. He would extinguish the sun if the sun incommoded him. Give these happy tidings to your sister, my dear cousin. I have dreamed that the unlucky Englishman was dead. I cannot recollect whether it was by steel or by poison. Only of this I am sure, I have dreamed he was dead, and you know my dreams never deceive me. Be assured, then, of seeing me soon return. Capital, cried Athos. You are the king of poets, my dear Aramis. You speak like the Apocalypse, and you are as true as the Gospel. There is nothing now to do but to put the address to this letter. That is easily done, said Aramis. He folded the letter fancifully and took up his pen and wrote, To Emily Mitchin, seamstress, Tours. The 3 friends looked at one another and laughed. They were caught. Now, said Aramis, you will please to understand, gentlemen, that Bazin alone can carry this letter to Tours. My cousin knows nobody but Bazin and places confidence in nobody but him. Any other person would fail. Besides, Bazin is ambitious and learned, Bazin has read history, gentlemen. He knows that Sixtus V became pope after having kept pigs. Well, as he means to enter the church at the same time as myself, he does not despair of becoming pope in his turn, or at least a cardinal. You can understand that a man who has such views will never allow himself to be taken, or if taken, will undergo martyrdom rather than speak. Very well, said D'Artagnan, I consent to Bazin with all my heart, but grant me Planchet. Milady had him one day turned out of doors, with sundry blows of a good stick to accelerate his motions. Now, Planchet has an excellent memory, and I will be bound that sooner than relinquish any possible means of vengeance, he will allow himself to be beaten to death. If your arrangements at Tours are your arrangements, Aramis, those of London are mine. I request then that Planchet may be chosen, more particularly as he has already been to London with me, and knows how to speak correctly. London, sir, if you please, and my master, Lord D'Artagnan. With that you may be satisfied he can make his way, both going and returning. In that case, said Athos, Planchet must receive 700 livres for going and 700 livres for coming back, and Bazin 300 livres for going and 300 livres for returning. That will reduce the sum to 5,000 livres. We will each take 1,000 livres to be employed as seems good, and we will leave a fund of 1,000 livres under the guardianship of Monsieur Abbé here, for extraordinary occasions or common wants. Will that do? My dear Athos, said Aramis, you speak like Nestor, who was, as everyone knows, the wisest among the Greeks. Well then, said Athos, it is agreed. Planchet and Bazin shall go. Everything considered, I am not sorry to retain Grimaud. He is accustomed to my ways and I am particular. Yesterday's affair must have shaken him a little. His voyage would upset him quite. Planchet was sent for and instructions were given him. The matter had been named to him by D'Artagnan, who in the first place pointed out the money to him, then the glory and then the danger. I will carry the letter in the lining of my coat, said Planchet, and if I am taken I will swallow it. Well, but then you will not be able to fulfill your commission, said D'Artagnan. You will give me a copy this evening, which I shall know by heart tomorrow. D'Artagnan looked at his friends as if to say, well, what did I tell you? Now, continued he, addressing Planchet, you have 8 days to get an interview with Lord de Winter. You have 8 days to return, in all 16 days. If, on the 16th day after your departure, at 8 o'clock in the evening you are not here, no money, even if it be but 5 minutes past 8. Then, monsieur, said Planchet, you must buy me a watch. Take this, said Athos with his usual careless generosity, giving him his own, and be a good lad. Remember, if you talk, if you babble, if you get drunk, you risk your master's head, who has so much confidence in your fidelity and who answers for you. But remember also, that if by your fault any evil happens to D'Artagnan, I will find you, wherever you may be, for the purpose of ripping up your belly. Oh, monsieur, said Planchet, humiliated by the suspicion, and moreover, terrified at the calm air of the musketeer. And I, said Porthos, rolling his large eyes, remember, I will skin you alive. Ah, monsieur. And I, said Aramis with his soft, melodious voice, remember that I will roast you at a slow fire like a savage. Ah, monsieur. Planchet began to weep. We will not venture to say whether it was from terror created by the threats or from tenderness at seeing 4 friends so closely united. D'Artagnan took his hand. See, Planchet, said he, these gentlemen only say this out of affection for me, but at bottom they all like you. Ah, monsieur, said Planchet, I will succeed or I will consent to be cut in quarters, and if they do cut me in quarters, be assured that not a morsel of me will speak. It was decided that Planchet should set out the next day at 8 o'clock in the morning in order, as he had said, that he might during the night learn the letter by heart. He gained just 12 hours by this engagement. He was to be back on the 16th day by 8 o'clock in the evening. In the morning, as he was mounting his horse, D'Artagnan, who felt at the bottom of his heart a partiality for the Duke, took Planchet aside. Listen, said he to him. When you have given the letter to Lord de Winter and he has read it, you will further say to him, watch over his Grace Lord Buckingham, for they wish to assassinate him. But this, Planchet, is so serious and important that I have not informed my friends that I would entrust this secret to you, and for a captain's commission I would not write it. Be satisfied, monsieur, said Planchet, you shall see if confidence can be placed in me. Mounted on an excellent horse, which he was to leave at the end of 20 leagues in order to take the post, Planchet set off at a gallop, his spirits a little depressed by the triple promise made him by the musketeers, but otherwise as light-hearted as possible. Bazin set out the next day for Tours, and was allowed 8 days for performing his commission. The four friends, during the period of these two absences, had, as may well be supposed, the eye on the watch, the nose to the wind, and the ear on the hark. Their days were passed in endeavoring to catch all that was said, in observing the proceeding of the cardinal, and in looking out for all the couriers who arrived. More than once an involuntary trembling seized them when called upon for some unexpected service. They had, besides, to look constantly to their own proper safety. Milady was a phantom which, when it had once appeared to people, did not allow them to sleep very quietly. On the morning of the 8th day, Bazin, fresh as ever, and smiling, according to custom, entered the cabaret of the Parpaillot as the four friends were sitting down to breakfast, saying, as had been agreed upon, "Monsieur Aramis, the answer from your cousin." The four friends exchanged a joyful glance. Half of the work was done. It is true, however, that it was the shorter and easier part. Aramis, blushing in spite of himself, took the letter, which was in a large, coarse hand and not particular for its orthography. "Good God!" cried he, laughing, "I quite despair of my poor Mitchen. She will never write like Monsieur de Voiture." "What does you mean by poor Mitchen?" said the Swiss, who was chatting with the four friends when the letter came. "Oh, pardieu, less than nothing," said Aramis. "A charming little seamstress, whom I love dearly and from whose hand I requested a few lines as a sort of keepsake." "The devil," said the Swiss, "if she is as great a lady as her writing is large, you are a lucky fellow, comrade." Aramis read the letter and passed it to Athos. "See what she writes to me, Athos," said he. Athos cast a glance over the epistle, and to disperse all the suspicions that might have been created, read aloud. "My cousin, my sister and I are skillful in interpreting dreams, and even entertain great fear of them. But of yours it may be said, I hope, every dream is an illusion. Adieu. Take care of yourself, and act so that we may from time to time hear you spoken of. Marie Mitchen." "And what dream does she mean?" asked the dragoon who had approached during the reading. "Yes, what's the dream?" said the Swiss. "Well, pardieu," said Aramis, "it was only this. I had a dream and I related it to her." "Yes, yes," said the Swiss, "it's simple enough to tell a dream, but I never dream." "You are very fortunate," said Athos, rising. "I wish I could say as much." "Never," replied the Swiss, enchanted that a man like Athos could envy him anything. "Never, never." D'Artagnan, seeing Athos rise, did likewise, took his arm and went out. Porthos and Aramis remained behind to encounter the jokes of the dragoon and the Swiss. As to Bazin, he went and lay down on a truss of straw, and as he had more imagination than the Swiss, he dreamed that Aramis, having become pope, adorned his head with a cardinal's hat. But, as we have said, Bazin had not, by his fortunate return, removed more than a part of the uneasiness which weighed upon the four friends. The days of expectation are long, and D'Artagnan in particular would have wagered that the days were 44 hours. He forgot the necessary slowness of navigation. He exaggerated to himself the power of Milady. He credited this woman, who appeared to him the equal of a demon, with agents as supernatural as herself. At the least noise, he imagined himself about to be arrested, and that Planchet was being brought back to be confronted with himself and his friends. Still further, his confidence in the worthy Picard, at one time so great, diminished day by day. This anxiety became so great that it even extended to Aramis and Porthos. Athos alone remained unmoved, as if no danger hovered over him, and as if he breathed his customary atmosphere. On the 16th day in particular, these signs were so strong in D'Artagnan and his two friends that they could not remain quiet in one place, and wandered about like ghosts on the road by which Planchet was expected. "Really," said Athos to them, "you are not men but children to let a woman terrify you so. And what does it amount to, after all? To be imprisoned. Well, but we should be taken out of prison. Madame Bonacieux was released. To be decapitated? Why, every day in the trenches we go cheerfully to expose ourselves to worse than that, for a bullet may break a leg, and I am convinced a surgeon would give us more pain in cutting off a thigh than an executioner in cutting off a head. Wait quietly then, in 2 hours, in 4, in 6 hours at latest, Planchet will be here. He promised to be here, and I have very great faith in Planchet, who appears to me to be a very good lad." "But if he does not come?" said D'Artagnan. "Well, if he does not come, it will be because he has been delayed, that's all. He may have fallen from his horse, he may have cut a caper from the deck. He may have traveled so fast against the wind as to have brought on a violent catarrh. Gentlemen, let us reckon upon accidents. Life is a chaplet of little miseries which the philosopher counts with a smile. Be philosophers as I am, gentlemen. Sit down at the table and let us drink. Nothing makes the future look so bright as surveying it through a glass of Chambertin." "That's all very well," replied D'Artagnan, but I am tired of fearing when I open a fresh bottle that the wine may come from the cellar of Milady." "You are very fastidious," said Athos. "Such a beautiful woman." "A woman of mark," said Porthos with his loud laugh. Athos started, passed his hand over his brow to remove the drops of perspiration that burst forth, and rose in his turn with a nervous movement he could not repress. The day, however, passed away, and the evening came on slowly, but finally it came. The bars were filled with drinkers. Athos, who had pocketed his share of the diamond, seldom quit the parpaillet. He had found an M. de Bissigny, who, by the by, had given them a magnificent dinner, a partner worthy of his company. They were playing together as usual when 7 o'clock sounded. The patrol was heard passing to double the posts. At 7:30 the retreat was sounded. "We are lost," said D'Artagnan in the ear of Athos. "You mean to say we have lost," said Athos quietly, drawing 4 pistoles from his pocket and throwing them upon the table. "Come, gentlemen," said he, "they are beating the tattoo. Let us to bed." And Athos went out of the parpaillet, followed by D'Artagnan. Aramis came behind, giving his arm to Porthos. Aramis mumbled verses to himself, and Porthos from time to time pulled a hair or two from his mustache, in sign of despair. But all at once a shadow appeared in the darkness, the outline of which was familiar to D'Artagnan, and a well-known voice said, "Monsieur, I have brought your cloak. It is chilly this evening." "Planchet!" cried D'Artagnan, beside himself with joy. "Planchet!" repeated Aramis and Porthos. "Well, yes, Planchet, to be sure," said Athos. "What is there so astonishing in that? He promised to be back by 8 o'clock, and 8 is striking. Bravo, Planchet, you are a lad of your word, and if ever you leave your master, I will promise you a place in my service." "Oh no, never," said Planchet. "I will never leave Monsieur D'Artagnan." At the same time D'Artagnan felt that Planchet slipped a note into his hand. D'Artagnan felt a strong inclination to embrace Planchet as he had embraced him on his departure, but he feared lest this mark of affection bestowed upon his lackey in the open street might appear extraordinary to passers-by, and he restrained himself. "I have the note," said he to Athos and to his friends. "That's well," said Athos. "Let us go home and read it." The note burned the hand of D'Artagnan. He wished to hasten their steps, but Athos took his arm and passed it under his own, and the young man was forced to regulate his pace by that of his friend. At length they reached the tent, lit a lamp, and while Planchet stood at the entrance that the 4 friends might not be surprised, D'Artagnan, with a trembling hand, broke the seal and opened the so anxiously expected letter. It contained half a line in a hand perfectly British, and with a conciseness as perfectly Spartan. "Thank you, be easy." D'Artagnan translated this for the others. Athos took the letter from the hands of D'Artagnan, approached the lamp, set fire to the paper, and did not let go till it was reduced to a cinder. Then, calling Planchet, he said, "Now, my lad, you may claim your 700 livres, but you did not run much risk with such a note as that." "I am not to blame for having tried every means to compress it," said Planchet. "Well," cried D'Artagnan, "tell us all about it." "Dame, that's a long job, monsieur." "You are right, Planchet," said Athos. "Besides, the tattoo has been sounded, and we should be observed if we kept the light burning much longer than the others." "So be it," said D'Artagnan. "Go to bed, Planchet, and sleep soundly." "My faith, monsieur, that will be the first time I have done so for 16 days." "And me too," said D'Artagnan. "And me too," said Porthos. "And me too," said Aramis. "Well, if you will have the truth, and me too," said Athos. Chapter 49. Fatality. Meantime Milady, drunk with passion, roaring on the deck like a lioness that has been embarked, had been tempted to throw herself into the sea that she might regain the coast, for she could not get rid of the thought that she had been insulted by D'Artagnan, threatened by Athos, and that she had quit France without being revenged on them. This idea soon became so insupportable to her that at the risk of whatever terrible consequences might result to herself from it, she implored the captain to put her on shore. But the captain, eager to escape from his false position, placed between French and English cruisers, like the bat between the mice and the birds, was in great haste to regain England, and positively refused to obey what he took for a woman's caprice, promising his passenger, who had been particularly recommended to him by the cardinal, to land her, if the sea and the French permitted him, at one of the ports of Brittany, either at Lorient or Brest. But the wind was contrary, the sea bad. They tacked and kept off shore. 9 days after leaving the Charente, pale with fatigue and vexation, Milady saw only the blue coasts of Finisterre appear. She calculated that to cross this corner of France and return to the cardinal it would take her at least 3 days. Add another day for landing and that would make 4. Add these 4 to the 9 others, that would be 13 days lost, 13 days, during which so many important events might pass in London. She reflected likewise that the cardinal would be furious at her return, and consequently would be more disposed to listen to the complaints brought against her than to the accusations she brought against others. She allowed the vessel to pass Lorient and Brest without repeating her request to the captain, who, on his part, took care not to remind her of it. Milady therefore continued her voyage, and on the very day that Planchet embarked at Portsmouth for France, the messenger of his eminence entered the port in triumph. All the city was agitated by an extraordinary movement. 4 large vessels, recently built, had just been launched. At the end of the jetty, his clothes richly laced with gold, glittering as was customary with him, with diamonds and precious stones, his hat ornamented with a white feather which drooped upon his shoulder, Buckingham was seen surrounded by a staff almost as brilliant as himself. It was one of those rare and beautiful days in winter when England remembers that there is a sun. The star of day, pale but nevertheless still splendid, was setting in the horizon, glorifying at once the heavens and the sea with bands of fire, and casting upon the towers and the old houses of the city a last ray of gold which made the windows sparkle like the reflection of a conflagration. Breathing that sea breeze, so much more invigorating and balsamic as the land is approached, contemplating all the power of those preparations she was commissioned to destroy, all the power of that army which she was to combat alone, she, a woman with a few bags of gold, Milady compared herself mentally to Judith, the terrible Jewess, when she penetrated the camp of the Assyrians and beheld the enormous mass of chariots, horses, men and arms, which a gesture of her hand was to dissipate like a cloud of smoke. They entered the roadstead, but as they drew near in order to cast anchor, a little cutter, looking like a coast guard formidably armed, approached the merchant vessel and dropped into the sea a boat which directed its course to the latter. This boat contained an officer, a mate, and 8 rowers. The officer alone went on board, where he was received with all the deference inspired by the uniform. The officer conversed a few instants with the captain, gave him several papers, of which he was the bearer, to read, and upon the order of the merchant captain the whole crew of the vessel, both passengers and sailors, were called upon deck. When this species of summons was made, the officer inquired aloud the point of the brig's departure, its route, its landings, and to all these questions the captain replied without difficulty and without hesitation. Then the officer began to pass in review all the people, one after the other, and stopping when he came to Milady, surveyed her very closely, but without addressing a single word to her. He then returned to the captain, said a few words to him, and as if from that moment the vessel was under his command, he ordered a maneuver which the crew executed immediately. Then the vessel resumed its course, still escorted by the little cutter, which sailed side by side with it, menacing it with the mouths of its 6 cannon. The boat followed in the wake of the ship, a speck near the enormous mass. During the examination of Milady by the officer, as may well be imagined, Milady on her part was not less scrutinizing in her glances. But however great was the power of this woman with eyes of flame in reading the hearts of those whose secrets she wished to divine, she met this time with a countenance of such impassivity that no discovery followed her investigation. The officer who had stopped in front of her and studied her with so much care might have been 25 or 26 years of age. He was of pale complexion, with clear blue eyes rather deeply set. His mouth, fine and well cut, remained motionless in its correct lines. His chin, strongly marked, denoted that strength of will which in the ordinary Britannic type denotes mostly nothing but obstinacy. A brow a little receding, as is proper for poets, enthusiasts and soldiers, was scarcely shaded by short thin hair which, like the beard which covered the lower part of his face, was of a beautiful deep chestnut color. When they entered the port it was already night. The fog increased the darkness, and formed round the sternlights and lanterns of the jetty a circle like that which surrounds the moon when the weather threatens to become rainy. The air they breathed was heavy, damp, and cold. Milady, that woman so courageous and firm, shivered in spite of herself. The officer desired to have Milady's packages pointed out to him, and ordered them to be placed in the boat. When this operation was complete, he invited her to descend by offering her his hand. Milady looked at this man and hesitated. "Who are you, sir?" asked she, "who has the kindness to trouble yourself so particularly on my account?" "You may perceive, madam, by my uniform, that I am an officer in the English Navy," replied the young man. "But is it the custom for the officers in the English Navy to place themselves at the service of their female compatriots when they land in a port of Great Britain, and carry their gallantry so far as to conduct them ashore?" Yes, madam, it is the custom, not from gallantry but prudence, that in time of war foreigners should be conducted to particular hotels, in order that they may remain under the eye of the government until full information can be obtained about them. These words were pronounced with the most exact politeness and the most perfect calmness. Nevertheless, they had not the power of convincing Milady. "But I am not a foreigner, sir," said she, with an accent as pure as ever was heard between Portsmouth and Manchester. "My name is Lady Cleric, and this measure is general, madam, and you will seek in vain to evade it." "I will follow you then, sir." Accepting the hand of the officer, she began the descent of the ladder, at the foot of which the boat waited. The officer followed her. A large cloak was spread at the stern. The officer requested her to sit down upon this cloak and placed himself beside her. "Row," said he to the sailors. The 8 oars fell at once into the sea, making but a single sound, giving but a single stroke, and the boat seemed to fly over the surface of the water. In 5 minutes they gained the land. The officer leaped to the pier and offered his hand to Milady. The carriage was in waiting. "Is this carriage for us?" asked Milady. "Yes, madam," replied the officer. "The hotel then is far away?" "At the other end of the town." "Very well," said Milady, and she resolutely entered the carriage. The officer saw that the baggage was fastened carefully behind the carriage, and this operation ended, he took his place beside Milady and shut the door. Immediately, without any order being given or his place of destination indicated, the coachman set off at a rapid pace, and plunged into the streets of the city. So strange a reception naturally gave Milady ample matter for reflection, so seeing that the young officer did not seem at all disposed for conversation, she reclined in her corner of the carriage, and one after the other passed in review all the surmises which presented themselves to her mind. At the end of a quarter of an hour, however, surprised at the length of the journey, she leaned forward toward the door to see whither she was being conducted. Houses were no longer to be seen. Trees appeared in the darkness like great black phantoms chasing one another. Milady shuddered. "But we are no longer in the city, sir," said she. The young officer preserved silence. "I beg you to understand, sir, I will go no farther unless you tell me whither you are taking me." This threat brought no reply. "Oh, this is too much," cried Milady. "Help! Help!" No voice replied to hers. The carriage continued to roll on with rapidity. The officer seemed a statue. Milady looked at the officer with one of those terrible expressions peculiar to her countenance, and which so rarely failed of their effect. Anger made her eyes flash in the darkness. The young man remained immovable. Milady tried to open the door in order to throw herself out. "Take care, madam," said the young man coolly, "you will kill yourself in jumping." Milady reseated herself, foaming. The officer leaned forward, looked at her in his turn, and appeared surprised to see that face, just before so beautiful, distorted with passion and almost hideous. The artful creature at once comprehended that she was injuring herself by allowing him thus to read her soul. She collected her features and in a complaining voice said, "In the name of heaven, sir, tell me if it is to you, if it is to your government, if it is to an enemy I am to attribute the violence that is done me? No violence will be offered to you, madam, and what happens to you is the result of a very simple measure which we are obliged to adopt with all who land in England." "Then you don't know me, sir?" "It is the first time I have had the honor of seeing you." "And on your honor, you have no cause of hatred against me?" "None, I swear to you." There was so much serenity, coolness, mildness even in the voice of the young man, that Milady felt reassured. At length, after a journey of nearly an hour, the carriage stopped before an iron gate, which closed an avenue leading to a castle severe in form, massive and isolated. Then, as the wheels rolled over a fine gravel, Milady could hear a vast roaring, which she at once recognized as the noise of the sea dashing against some steep cliff. The carriage passed under 2 arched gateways, and at length stopped in a court large, dark, and square. Almost immediately the door of the carriage was opened. The young man sprang lightly out and presented his hand to Milady, who leaned upon it, and in her turn alighted with tolerable calmness. "Still then I am a prisoner," said Milady, looking around her, and bringing back her eyes with a most gracious smile to the young officer. "But I feel assured it will not be for long," added she. "My own conscience and your politeness, sir, are the guarantees of that." However flattering this compliment, the officer made no reply, but drawing from his belt a little silver whistle, such as boatswains use in ships of war, he whistled 3 times, with 3 different modulations. Immediately several men appeared, who unharnessed the smoking horses, and put the carriage into a coach-house. Then the officer, with the same calm politeness, invited his prisoner to enter the house. She, with a still smiling countenance, took his arm and passed with him under a low arched door, which by a vaulted passage, lighted only at the farther end, led to a stone staircase around an angle of stone. They then came to a massive door, which after the introduction into the lock of a key which the young man carried with him, turned heavily upon its hinges, and disclosed the chamber destined for Milady. With a single glance the prisoner took in the apartment in its minutest details. It was a chamber whose furniture was at once appropriate for a prisoner or a free man, and yet bars at the windows and outside bolts at the door decided the question in favor of the prison. In an instant all the strength of mind of this creature, though drawn from the most vigorous sources, abandoned her. She sank into a large easy chair, with her arms crossed, her head lowered, and expecting every instant to see a judge enter to interrogate her. But no one entered except 2 or 3 marines, who brought her trunks and packages, deposited them in a corner, and retired without speaking. The officer superintended all these details with the same calmness Milady had constantly seen in him, never pronouncing a word himself, and making himself obeyed by a gesture of his hand or a sound of his whistle. It might have been said that between this man and his inferiors spoken language did not exist, or had become useless. At length Milady could hold out no longer. She broke the silence. "In the name of heaven, sir," cried she, "what means all that is passing? Put an end to my doubts. I have courage enough for any danger I can foresee, for every misfortune which I understand. Where am I and why am I here? If I am free, why these bars and these doors? If I am a prisoner, what crime have I committed? You are here in the apartment destined for you, madam. I received orders to go and take charge of you on the sea, and to conduct you to this castle. This order I believe I have accomplished with all the exactness of a soldier, but also with the courtesy of a gentleman. There terminates, at least to the present moment, the duty I had to fulfill toward you. The rest concerns another person." "And who is that other person?" asked Milady warmly. "Can you not tell me his name?" At the moment a great jingling of spurs was heard on the stairs. Some voices passed and faded away, and the sound of a single footstep approached the door. "That person is here, madam," said the officer, leaving the entrance open, and drawing himself up in an attitude of respect. At the same time the door opened. A man appeared on the threshold. He was without a hat, carried a sword, and flourished a handkerchief in his hand. Milady thought she recognized this shadow in the gloom. She supported herself with one hand upon the arm of the chair, and advanced her head as if to meet a certainty. The stranger advanced slowly, and as he advanced, after entering into the circle of light projected by the lamp, Milady involuntarily drew back. Then when she had no longer any doubt, she cried in a state of stupor, "What, my brother, is it you?" "Yes, fair lady," replied Lord de Winter, making a bow, half courteous, half ironical, "it is I, myself." "But this castle, then?" "Is mine." "This chamber?" "Is yours." "I am then your prisoner?" "Nearly so. But this is a frightful abuse of power. No high-sounding words. Let us sit down and chat quietly as brother and sister ought to do." Then, turning toward the door, and seeing that the young officer was waiting for his last orders, he said, "All is well, I thank you. Now leave us alone, Mr. Felton." Chapter 50. Chat between brother and sister. During the time which Lord de Winter took to shut the door, close a shutter, and draw a chair near to his sister-in-law's fauteuil, Milady, anxiously thoughtful, plunged her glance into the depths of possibility, and discovered all the plan, of which she could not even obtain a glance as long as she was ignorant into whose hands she had fallen. She knew her brother-in-law to be a worthy gentleman, a bold hunter, an intrepid player, enterprising with women, but by no means remarkable for his skill in intrigues. How had he discovered her arrival and caused her to be seized? Why did he detain her? Athos had dropped some words which proved that the conversation she had with the cardinal had fallen into outside ears, but she could not suppose that he had dug a countermine so promptly and so boldly. She rather feared that her preceding operations in England might have been discovered. Buckingham might have guessed that it was she who had cut off the 2 studs, and avenged himself for that little treachery, but Buckingham was incapable of going to any excess against a woman, particularly if that woman was supposed to have acted from a feeling of jealousy. This supposition appeared to her most reasonable. It seemed to her that they wanted to revenge the past, and not to anticipate the future. At all events, she congratulated herself upon having fallen into the hands of her brother-in-law, with whom she reckoned she could deal very easily, rather than into the hands of an acknowledged and intelligent enemy. "Yes, let us chat, brother," said she, with a kind of cheerfulness, decided as she was to draw from the conversation, in spite of all the dissimulation Lord de Winter could bring, the revelations of which she stood in need to regulate her future conduct. "You have, then, decided to come to England again," said Lord de Winter, "in spite of the resolutions you so often expressed in Paris never to set your feet on British ground?" Milady replied to this question by another question. "To begin with, tell me," said she, "how have you watched me so closely as to be aware beforehand not only of my arrival, but even of the day, the hour, and the port at which I should arrive?" Lord de Winter adopted the same tactics as Milady, thinking that as his sister-in-law employed them they must be the best. "But tell me, my dear sister," replied he, "what makes you come to England?" "I come to see you," replied Milady, without knowing how much she aggravated by this reply the suspicions to which D'Artagnan's letter had given birth in the mind of her brother-in-law, and only desiring to gain the goodwill of her auditor by a falsehood. "Ah, to see me?" said de Winter cunningly. "To be sure to see you. What is there astonishing in that? And you had no other object in coming to England but to see me?" "No." "So it was for me alone you have taken the trouble to cross the Channel?" "For you alone." "The deuce! What tenderness, my sister!" "But am I not your nearest relative?" demanded Milady, with a tone of the most touching ingenuousness. "And my only heir, are you not?" said Lord de Winter in his turn, fixing his eyes on those of Milady. Whatever command she had over herself, Milady could not help starting, and as in pronouncing the last words Lord de Winter placed his hand upon the arm of his sister, this start did not escape him. In fact, the blow was direct and severe. The first idea that occurred to Milady's mind was that she had been betrayed by Kitty, and that she had recounted to the Baron the selfish aversion toward himself of which she had imprudently allowed some marks to escape before her servant. She also recollected the furious and imprudent attack she had made upon D'Artagnan when he spared the life of her brother. "I do not understand, my lord," said she, in order to gain time and make her adversary speak out. "What do you mean to say? Is there any secret meaning concealed beneath your words?" "Oh, my God, no," said Lord de Winter with apparent good nature. "You wish to see me and you come to England. I learn this desire, or rather I suspect that you feel it, and in order to spare you all the annoyances of a nocturnal arrival in a port and all the fatigues of landing, I send one of my officers to meet you, I place a carriage at his orders, and he brings you hither to this castle, of which I am governor, whither I come every day, and where, in order to satisfy our mutual desire of seeing each other, I have prepared you a chamber. What is there more astonishing in all that I have said to you than in what you have told me? No, what I think astonishing is that you should expect my coming. And yet that is the most simple thing in the world, my dear sister. Have you not observed that the captain of your little vessel, on entering the roadstead, sent forward, in order to obtain permission to enter the port, a little boat bearing his logbook and the register of his voyagers? I am commandant of the port. They brought me that book. I recognized your name in it. My heart told me what your mouth has just confirmed, that is to say, with what view you have exposed yourself to the dangers of a sea so perilous, or at least so troublesome at this moment, and I sent my cutter to meet you. You know the rest." Milady knew that Lord de Winter lied, and she was the more alarmed. "My brother," continued she, "was not that my Lord Buckingham whom I saw on the jetty this evening as we arrived?" "Himself." "Ah, I can understand how the sight of him struck you," replied Lord de Winter. "You came from a country where he must be very much talked of, and I know that his armaments against France greatly engaged the attention of your friend the Cardinal." "My friend the Cardinal!" cried Milady, seeing that on this point as on the other Lord de Winter seemed well instructed. "Is he not your friend?" replied the Baron negligently. "Ah, pardon. I thought so, but we will return to my Lord Duke presently. Let us not depart from the sentimental turn our conversation had taken. You came, you say, to see me?" "Yes." "Well, I reply that you shall be served to the height of your wishes, and that we shall see each other every day." "Am I, then, to remain here eternally?" demanded Milady with a certain terror. "Do you find yourself badly lodged, sister? Demand anything you want, and I will hasten to have you furnished with it. But I have neither my women nor my servants." "You shall have all, madam. Tell me on what footing your household was established by your first husband, and although I am only your brother-in-law, I will arrange one similar." "My first husband!" cried Milady, looking at Lord de Winter with eyes almost starting from their sockets. "Yes, your French husband. I don't speak of my brother. If you have forgotten, as he is still living, I can write to him and he will send me information on the subject." A cold sweat burst from the brow of Milady. "You jest," said she in a hollow voice. "Do I look so?" asked the Baron, rising and going a step backward. "Or rather you insult me," continued she, pressing with her stiffened hands the two arms of her easy chair, and raising herself upon her wrists. "I insult you," said Lord de Winter with contempt. "In truth, madam, do you think that can be possible?" "Indeed, sir," said Milady, "you must be either drunk or mad. Leave the room and send me a woman. Women are very indiscreet, my sister. Cannot I serve you as a waiting maid? By that means all our secrets will remain in the family." "Insolent!" cried Milady, and as if acted upon by a spring, she bounded toward the Baron, who awaited her attack with his arms crossed, but nevertheless with one hand on the hilt of his sword. "Come," said he. "I know you are accustomed to assassinate people, but I warn you I shall defend myself even against you." "You are right," said Milady. "You have all the appearance of being cowardly enough to lift your hand against a woman. Perhaps so, and I have an excuse, for mine would not be the first hand of a man that has been placed upon you, I imagine." And the Baron pointed, with a slow and accusing gesture, to the left shoulder of Milady, which he almost touched with his finger. Milady uttered a deep, inward shriek, and retreated to a corner of the room like a panther which crouches for a spring. "Oh, growl as much as you please," cried Lord de Winter, "but don't try to bite, for I warn you that it would be to your disadvantage. There are here no procurators who regulate successions beforehand. There is no knight-errant to come and seek a quarrel with me on account of the fair lady I detain a prisoner, but I have judges quite ready who will quickly dispose of a woman so shameless as to glide, a bigamist, into the bed of Lord de Winter, my brother. And these judges, I warn you, will soon send you to an executioner who will make both your shoulders alike." The eyes of Milady darted such flashes that although he was a man and armed before an unarmed woman, he felt the chill of fear glide through his whole frame. However, he continued all the same, but with increasing warmth, "Yes, I can very well understand that after having inherited the fortune of my brother it would be very agreeable to you to be my heir likewise, but know beforehand, if you kill me or cause me to be killed, my precautions are taken. Not a penny of what I possess will pass into your hands. Were you not already rich enough, you who possess nearly 1,000,000? And could you not stop your fatal career if you did not do evil for the infinite and supreme joy of doing it? Oh, be assured, if the memory of my brother were not sacred to me, you should rot in a state dungeon or satisfy the curiosity of sailors at Tyburn. I will be silent, but you must endure your captivity quietly. In 15 or 20 days I shall set out for La Rochelle with the army, but on the eve of my departure a vessel which I shall see depart will take you hence and convey you to our colonies in the south. And be assured that you shall be accompanied by one who will blow your brains out at the first attempt you make to return to England or the Continent." Milady listened with an attention that dilated her inflamed eyes. "Yes, at present," continued Lord de Winter, "you will remain in this castle. The walls are thick, the door strong, and the bars solid. Besides, your window opens immediately over the sea. The men of my crew, who are devoted to me for life and death, mount guard around this apartment, and watch all the passages that lead to the courtyard. Even if you gained the yard, there would still be 3 iron gates for you to pass. The order is positive. A step, a gesture, a word on your part, denoting an effort to escape, and you are to be fired upon. If they kill you, English justice will be under an obligation to me for having saved it trouble. I see your features regain their calmness, your countenance recovers its assurance. You are saying to yourself, 15 days, 20 days? Bah! I have an inventive mind. Before that is expired some idea will occur to me. I have an infernal spirit. I shall meet with a victim. Before 15 days are gone by I shall be away from here. Ah, try it." Milady, finding her thoughts betrayed, dug her nails into her flesh to subdue every emotion that might give to her face any expression except agony. Lord de Winter continued, "The officer who commands here in my absence you have already seen, and therefore know him. He knows how, as you must have observed, to obey an order, for you did not, I am sure, come from Portsmouth hither without endeavoring to make him speak. What do you say of him? Could a statue of marble have been more impassive and more mute? You have already tried the power of your seductions upon many men, and unfortunately you have always succeeded, but I give you leave to try them upon this one. Pardieu! If you succeed with him, I pronounce you the demon himself." He went toward the door and opened it hastily. "Call Mr. Felton," said he. "Wait a minute longer, and I will introduce him to you." There followed between these two personages a strange silence, during which the sound of a slow and regular step was heard approaching. Shortly a human form appeared in the shade of the corridor, and the young lieutenant, with whom we are already acquainted, stopped at the threshold to receive the orders of the Baron. "Come in, my dear John," said Lord de Winter. "Come in and shut the door." The young officer entered. "Now," said the Baron, "look at this woman. She is young, she is beautiful, she possesses all earthly seductions. Well, she is a monster who, at 25 years of age, has been guilty of as many crimes as you could read of in a year in the archives of our tribunals. Her voice prejudices her hearers in her favor. Her beauty serves as a bait to her victims. Her body even pays what she promises. I must do her that justice. She will try to seduce you, perhaps she will try to kill you. I have extricated you from misery, Felton. I have caused you to be named lieutenant. I once saved your life, you know on what occasion. I am for you not only a protector but a friend, not only a benefactor but a father. This woman has come back again into England for the purpose of conspiring against my life. I hold this serpent in my hands. Well, I call you and say to you, friend Felton John, my child, guard me, and more particularly guard yourself against this woman. Swear, by your hopes of salvation, to keep her safely for the chastisement she has merited. John Felton, I trust your word. John Felton, I put faith in your loyalty. My lord, said the young officer, summoning to his mild countenance all the hatred he could find in his heart, my lord, I swear all shall be done as you desire. Milady received this look like a resigned victim. It was impossible to imagine a more submissive or a more mild expression than that which prevailed on her beautiful countenance. Lord de Winter himself could scarcely recognize the tigress who, a minute before, prepared apparently for a fight. She is not to leave this chamber, understand, John, continued the Baron. She is to correspond with nobody, she is to speak to no one but you, if you will do her the honor to address a word to her. That is sufficient, my lord. I have sworn. And now, madam, try to make your peace with God, for you are judged by men. Milady let her head sink as if crushed by this sentence. Lord de Winter went out, making a sign to Felton, who followed him, shutting the door after him. One instant after, the heavy step of a marine who served as sentinel was heard in the corridor, his axe in his girdle and his musket on his shoulder. Milady remained for some minutes in the same position, for she thought they might perhaps be examining her through the keyhole. She then slowly raised her head, which had resumed its formidable expression of menace and defiance, ran to the door to listen, looked out of her window, and returning to bury herself again in her large armchair, she reflected.